What's happening? Welcome to the 50th episode of the Slapstream with Djordje, live from Slapsville. There's already some people lined up here.
Welcome to
and
the 50th
thanks so much for that. And okay, I made the same mistake I did on the first episode. I had a YouTube open. Hello, Carolyn. Happy Slapper Day. Hello, Casey. Good morning from the central coast of California. Good evening from Serbia. I'm still in Serbia, not for too long. Next one probably going to be from Los Angeles. I should be back home. First of all, I would like to thank every single one of you for these 50 episodes. I can't believe I had the chance to do this for almost a year now. 50 episodes, almost a year now, with so many amazing players and amazing members of the audience, of the Slapstream audience. I think that we built a pretty strong slap-based Slapstream community, and I'm really thankful for that. I will try to continue as long as possible. Things are opening again, so hopefully I'm going to start touring soon. I'm going to start playing, and all of you, I hope that you're going to start touring and playing, and so that we probably not going to be able to gather like this every Saturday for too long, but who knows? You know, I'll try to keep this going for as long as I can, because I think there's still a decent amount of slappers that I would like to feature, and then there's a decent amount of people that I think we all would be able to learn from. So I'm not stopping. So, and one of the main reasons why I'm able to continue this is because of your donations through Venmo and PayPal. So if you'd like to continue supporting the Slapstream, check out the links in the description of this video, and especially to all the patrons on my Patreon. So my Patreon is also in the description of this video. So please check that out. And if you haven't slapped this subscribe button, that should be around here. Make sure to do that. And I just realized that I forgot to put the logo here. And I would like to feature my today's guest, to announce my today's guest. And it's a special guest. Like every Slapstream guest is kind of handpicked. And that's not different with this episode, and I would like to feature Jack Hanlon. What's up?
Hey, what's happening?
How's it going? Thanks a lot for making the time. I know that Saturday is your work day at the Upton, and then that you guys, made this happening, that you're able to share your knowledge and your expertise on slap bass during your work day.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for the invitation to join you on your show. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks so much. First of all, thanks to Upton, for.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Yeah. Thank you for them for providing the computer. And yeah, we got a pretty decent, I think we got a pretty appropriate backdrop for today's program.
It looks awesome. I think it's one of the best we had so far. I wonder what, our audience think that. And then before we continue, I would like to ask these people just to let us know if they can hear us and see us fine, and also what they think about the background. First of all, how are you? How have you been doing during this craziness, during the pandemic? Have you been playing music? I know that you've been mostly doing your luthier job, but besides that, what else is going on in your life?
Sure. Yeah, so obviously in this area there hasn't been a lot of work to do as far as playing music. There was some opportunities over the summer. Personally, I didn't really do any playing at all, but luckily I've been able to just keep practicing on my own. Even though we're not gigging or playing gigs or anything, I still practice. I still pick up the bass, at least 3 or 4 times a week, and at least spend 15, 20 minutes, just keeping my chops up, keeping the calluses up, and just kind of practicing a little bit, maybe reviewing some stuff that I hadn't had a chance to really do before, or just kind of just keeping things going. The nice thing about playing bass is you can still do that. I feel bad for some of the drummers. Some of my drummer friends have been saying how they've been really struggling for this. I suppose it's a little harder to play just practice drums. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I only say that just because so many of my drum friends I haven't really been playing as much as I should be. I'm not practicing as much as I should be. So I've been practicing. I've been doing okay. You know, we're all healthy here. I kind of live kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so it's not quite as tricky as it was living in the city or something like that, where you're around so many people all the time. It's hard to get space away from people. Out here, a little easier, so it's been good that way. And yeah, still practicing, still playing, and luckily we've been able to work basically through this entire pandemic.
That's great. So people still have the need for good basses, and they need to repair them as well. And
yeah. It's good time for people to take advantage of that. If you don't have the gigs, it's nice. Now might be the time to actually take that top off and fix that crack that you've been talking about forever. You know.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
we're going to talk more about Upton later on during the episode. Before we get to that, I would like to start with kind of the beginnings of your musical career, and if you can tell me, how did you discover music? How did you start playing music, and then why did you choose upright bass?
Yeah, sure. So I really kind of started playing music because, well, I started hanging out with some friends of mine, an old friend of mine. I started hanging out with him again, and he was really into music. And I had kind of been into music for a little while when I was a really small little child, kind of got out of it. And I started hanging out with him, and he was clearly into music. And, we started hanging out, and I think probably started skateboarding and stuff like that together. And, but I started hanging out with him, and he was really into heavy metal music at the time, bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Metallica was just starting to become a thing back then. We're talking kind of 87, 86, 87 at this point. So, but I started hanging out with him, and he had a friend. His name's Zach Stewart, and Zach had a drum set. And my friend Billy, he played the guitar. So Zach was like, well, you should play the bass. We need the bass. He's like, okay, I'll play the bass. I didn't really know anything about playing instruments at all. So luckily my dad helped me out. There was a music store in town, so I did get my first bass guitar. It was a Hondo. I remember it was a black and white black Hondo with a white pickguard. It was a Fender P-Bass copy. It was a Hondo. And we started just playing in punk bands. I played with those guys for a while, and then I just kept playing throughout high school, playing bass guitar throughout high school, and played in indie bands throughout the late 80s and early 90s. And then I do remember making the switch to double bass really came, and this may sound really generic, but I was always a Cramps fan. I don't know why, but me and my friends always back then, even though we started off getting into metal and stuff, but when we got the band going together, we were more into punk. We were more into the Ramones. The Misfits were huge influences on us. We loved the Misfits. It's one of our favorite bands. And of course, we discovered the Misfits from Metallica, just most people my age probably did. But anyways, we were always Cramps fans. So I had the chance to go see them. They were playing in Providence, and the opening band was the Reverend Horton Heat. And I didn't know anything about it. I think they were really doing that push for that second record, I believe, at the time. On Sub Pop. So I think I'd seen some flyers for that, or seen that picture of the album cover before, but I didn't really know anything about them, But Sub Pop was on my radar at that time because I was kind of indie rock music and a lot of stuff that was happening out on the Northwest coast. So I remember seeing Evermore Heat, and I remember seeing Jimbo up there with the bass, and I was and just hearing that sound, and because they were so loud, and the bass was just so thunderous. He had a great sound even back then, before when the equipment was even was not quite as good. But the bass was just so loud. I just seen him playing the upright bass and doing all that slap stuff. I was that's what I want to do. I want to do that. That is cool. So that's kind of how it started. And then I was already friends with Johnny McGuire from Royal Crowns. So I kind of started bugging him at a gig one night. Not even a gig I was playing. We just happened to be at the same show. And so I tell him I really wanted to play more kind of rockabilly style music. I was getting more into it. And he said, well, I'm starting this new band. But if you want, you can play the bass. And I was all right, cool. I said, well, you don't. I don't have a double bass. He's like, well, that's cool. We'll just play the bass guitar or whatever. So he gave me the chance to play, and I immediately did go out and buy a double bass. I had one friend who played double bass. His name's Rick Massimo. He writes for the Providence Journal now. Anyways, he played in a band called the Smoking Jackets, and they were like a kind of piano-based blues band. They did like really New Orleans stuff, but really intense, like really dance music stuff, you know, like barrel house blues, I think sometimes they call it, you know. And but he had a bass. I was like, where can I get one of these things? He's like, oh, you got to go to this place called Twin City Music. And Twin City Music was really cool because it had been around since the 40s. They were probably one of the first Fender dealers in Rhode Island, you know. They'd been around forever. But the guy who owned the store, Bob Panaruti, was a bass player. So I walked in, I said, I need a bass. And he said, I can help you. So I ended up buying this kind of like blondie, kind of like German, probably from like the late 60s bass. And that was the first bass I had. And then, you know, we just started playing with the Royal Crowns. I didn't know how to play the double bass. So for me, it was real just sink or swim. You know, trying to learn the slap stuff was all based on recordings. I mean, this is like 93. So I don't know. I didn't have internet. I didn't have YouTube. If anybody else did, I don't know. But so I think like with most people my age, you had to kind of more or less listen to records, and hopefully somebody else in the area maybe played that style, and you could kind of pick up some stuff from them. And that kind of how it worked for me. I kind of got the basic broke down. I did have a really great, quick interaction. We got a chance to open for Sleepy LaBeef. He actually used to live in Massachusetts. He lived in Raynham for a little while, not too far from actually where I grew up. Anyways, we were playing a gig with him, and we were just kind of warming up, and he asked me, well, do you slap? And I said, well, I'm kind of learning. I got this shuffle thing I can kind of do, but that's it. But I don't really know how to do that, like boom, chicka, kind of thing. He's like, oh, let me show you. And he just kind of grabbed my bass, and he started playing it. And I just remember how he would pull, you know, because he would like kind of, he'd pull the string, then you kind of slap on top, and then come down again, and then pull again. So it was almost like this kind of hand-over-hand technique. And I was like the whole world opened up. I was like, I got it now. I figured out all the rest of it there. I was like, okay, I got it. So that's kind of how I started.
So you basically kind of started because of the Amazing Crowns, or you already kind of planned to start playing upright bass?
Yeah, I wanted. I mean, my bass guitar. I wasn't really doing a ton with the bass guitar. I was playing in a punk band at the time, and I was singing in the punk band as well. And I was just playing with the pick, and I hadn't really had a ton of interest in the bass guitar. I mean, I was playing the bass guitar almost more like a guitar. I would just kind of play the, you know, I wouldn't play chords, but I would just play the root. I wasn't really writing bass lines, which is fine for the kind of music we were playing. It was very kind of linear punk, you know, where, you know, the chords that's just stay in the pocket kind of music. But yeah, when I saw Jimbo, I was like, I want to do that, and like that kind of inspired me to play bass again. And I like the fact that with the double bass, it kind of makes you kind of simplify. You know, it's like sometimes, anyways, especially in that kind of music, it's like, you know, you're doing these walking bass patterns. It's always on that downbeat, you know. So it's like it's a very rudimentary form, and I think it was something I really needed to do just to kind of like I almost kind of need to relearn how to play bass. I think sometimes when you play rock music, it's great, but sometimes you kind of miss some of the fundamentals of music when you come in from that angle. And when I started playing like the rockabilly music and the country music, and you start finding these formulas, and you start finding how this music works, it really, for me anyways, I thought it did a lot for my playing in general. I think I became a better, when I did have opportunities to play rock music again, like more kind of standard, you know, classic kind of rock music, you know, 60s garage or punk or, you know, anything like that. I found I was a better bass player when I kind of like gave up the electric bass or the bass guitar totally. When I gave that up and just focused on the double bass, I think it made me a better bass player in general. But I always like that fundamental aspect of it, the more kind of simple thing. And of course, Reverend Hoyt stuff, Horton Heat stuff is obviously much more advanced, but when you go back to like the Elvis and the Johnny Cash stuff, and that music is so rudimentary and it's so great because of that, and all the fundamentals are there. You know,
oh, absolutely. I mean, that sound is just like so cool. It makes any kind of music genre super cool. You know, act a little extra cool for people that, you know, that dig that sound.
Sure.
I wonder, like, could you please kind of explain a little bit, how did you learn to play, and how did you get where you are right now? Did you have like any formal education, any lessons, books, like instructional videos, or whatever what was going on in the mid-90s?
Sure. So, I mean, when I first got the double bass, I remember the only thing I learned that day, and I'm really glad I did, because a lot of people take a little while to figure this out, was he actually told me how to hold the bass. which was super important. Like, how do you hold the double bass? It's like, so what you want to do is before you can put the bass in my hands. Okay, hold on, take a step back. And he said, okay, put your weight on your right leg. Now relax your left leg. Okay, now drop the bass into like that kind of crotch there and keep it kind of angled over you. And that's how you hold the double bass. You don't hold it like a cello, which most people, which I see all the time working here when people come in, they never hit the bass, they hold the cello. So usually the first thing I do is like, nope, step back, put your weight on your right leg, relax your left leg, drop the bass in. Okay, now you look like a bass player. So that was the first lesson. But throughout my period in the Crowns, no, I did not take any lessons at all. And so like my fingerings on the left hand made no sense. I was really winging it. I'd look at pictures and see how other people were doing it, and I just follow their mistakes sometimes. But or just kind of follow what they did. But yeah, it wasn't until I really started playing a lot of blues music where I really had to kind of like, well, might be playing a simple pattern, but the guy's gonna solo till God knows when. So it's like kind of like it's good to like know some like patterns and some fingerings and a little bit about improv so that you can work a little bit more. So I did take some lessons with this guy named Marty Ballou, who's a really great local bass player. And he taught me a lot of stuff. He really helped me improve, just really got the basic fingering of the double bass, which really was super helpful. And I really didn't start playing or practicing with him a little bit until the very, very tail end of the Crowns career run there. In fact, I do remember the last show we did, I was actually starting incorporating these new fingerings that he was showing me, which is a little tricky because I'm like learning this stuff and I'm like kind of like trying to do it live, which is always kind of dangerous when you don't really know what you're doing. But yeah, so that was about it. Really was through this guy Marty Ballou that I really started to kind of learn what I do know about the double bass. Is more or less come through him, and it was always in the context of building better bass lines in general, related to blues, rockabilly, country, rudimentary jazz stuff.
We have more and more people here, and we have like one interesting comment. It says, "Jack's the man," and everybody love your background. Jose Arana said like the background is the bee's knees. Carolyn wrote, "Can hear and see you fine. Background is amazing."
Oh, okay, good.
It is. I mean, so many basses behind you.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Do you play any other instruments besides bass?
Not really, no. I have a guitar, but I would definitely not call myself a guitarist. In fact, quick funny story about the guitar. So when I was a very young kid, my mom had this old K guitar, like the arch bar, the arch top guitar with the F holes and the pick guard on it, one of those kind of arch top guitars. And it was always in the basement. And like every song we'd be down in the basement playing, we'd like pick up the guitar and have like 3 strings on it or something like that. And then like when I started playing the bass, like in high school, I kind of took that guitar out, and of course I think I did something really dumb, which I probably put like the heaviest acoustic guitar strings I could find on it, which kind of made it almost impossible to play. But I always had the guitar. So somehow, like when I moved out of the house, I ended up having a guitar. So I ended up just fixing it recently. With the pandemic, I had nothing to do. It's like, all right, I got to fix this guitar. Because by the time, between being a kid and now, like the neck had come out. The neck set on those K guitars is horrible, which is why they all play like terrible, I think. And so like, every time you see a post, I'm like, oh, why does it play so bad? It's like, because the neck set's like this, But anyways, I finally fixed it up. So I have a guitar again. And it's my mom's old guitar. And I polished it all up. And I reset the neck. And I cleaned it all up. And I for some reason, I took the pick guard off, which was the coolest part about the guitar was this cool K pick guard. But I found a copy of one on like Reverb or something like that. So I finally fixed it up. So yeah, I have a guitar again. It's like I can strum a guitar. That's about it.
So now it might be the time to write some cool songs and
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Do you remember the first lick that you learned on the upright bass?
I've never just kind of have it happen by accident. I don't know why I kind of remember this, but for some reason I kind of do that. Like for some reason I was like listening to the records and stuff. It's like, and I couldn't believe they couldn't, in my head at that time, I'm a little funny this way. Sometimes like, biased or something. I don't know. Like, I was like, they can't actually just be pulling the string and letting it go. And then like, I kind of just did it. And it was like, I think that's all they're doing. And then they're just coming back. Obviously I hear the coming back down. It's like, that's easy. It's like, because even if you're just playing, simple even if you're just playing, a country line or a bluegrass line or any kind of line in two, your tendency is to, keep that time when you come back down. So I kind of knew that. I said, okay, they got to be doing that. But like, how are they doing the other part? And I was like, I got to just be pulling it. And I just kind of like started doing that, and I kind of got like the thing. And so the only pattern I could first play in the Crowns were shuffle patterns or swing patterns. I could only do like, kind of patterns. I couldn't do that. I had a lot of trouble. I was really struggling until I met Sleep in the Beat, and he showed me how. But yeah, so that was like the first thing I kind of did. And of course, the strings were steel. They were spiracores, I think, that were probably on the bass. That was a pretty standard string that you would find on a double bass, especially when you're buying it from a string shop. So they were probably like, metal strings, medium tension, pretty tough. But I started just soldiering through it. And then I heard somewhere along the way about gut strings. And like, I did no idea about the concept of gut strings. I had no idea where to get these gut strings. But I finally got them. And that's actually an interesting story kind of too, is how I found them. I think Kevin Patey from Jittery Jack was saying, hey, there's a dude in Boston. He makes lutes and he fixes lutes. So he has all kinds of gut. He has it hanging from his house, and he just uses it. He probably was using it to make frets and for tying tailpieces and stuff. But he sells it by the yard. You can go over to his house and you can buy it. So I looked the guy up, Boston Catlins. I think he's still in business. And I bought. He only had the top strings, the D and the G, which was fine. That's really what I needed. So I bought the strings from. I tracked him down, went to his house. Oh no, he mailed them to me. That was it. I used to have him mail them to me, and I put the strings on, and then things really started to open up. The playing got a lot easier.
That's a cool story. It's always interesting hearing that even in the 90s, people were kind of struggling to find different options for strings. That most of the people started on the steel and then discover some other type of strings. Something
a little easier to play so they could stop struggling. But then there's other guys that are just so strong that they can play the metal strings. I guess Lee Rocker plays like regular metal. I've heard he plays regular metal strings, medium tension. I don't know. That's what I heard.
He doesn't play anymore. He used to play until about maybe 5-6 years. He was playing steel strings exclusively, and then he doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah. There's a guy.
I play steel strings all the time. I never play anything else. But
I think if you get used to it, I think if you do practice and you get used to it, it's like anything else. If you kind of practice it, you can get used to that tension. I mean, I kind of went back to metal strings for a while, then I went back to gut strings. I mean, then there's locally. Well, he's local now. He's originally from. I think he's from the Toronto area. Originally, Spike Cats. I mean, he's always played metal strings, but he's strong. He's not like a super tall guy, but he's just physically strong. And when you watch him play, he's just got this arm that just can pull the strings. And he's always played metal strings. And it sounds like, he doesn't struggle at all with it. So people do it.
Sure. I mean, for me, it was always also the sound, and I play always the fair amount with the bow. So
sure, you need something with bow response.
Yeah. And if you want to do like some faster bebop lines or something,
Sure, you need the resistance to kind of play the faster lines. The gut strings can sometimes come out on you.
With steel strings, I kind of found the balance. But before we go any further, I would love to hear you play a little bit. Can you have something for us?
Yeah, sure. I could just talk about some of the basic stuff that I've learned. I don't really do anything eccentric. I don't think I do anything that nobody hasn't really seen before. I always just kind of like to connect lines together as best I can. I like to play smooth. I like lines that kind of flow together. So sometimes when I'm just walking a line, I'm always trying to think a little bit chromatic and also scalar, which I know is kind of rudimentary, but it works really good, and it kind of gives you the combination of something that sounds a little more bluesy sometimes when you mix in the chromatic, and then there's more country rockabilly when you go back to the scalar. And it's just kind of a nice mix, So if you just kind of I always like kind of mixing up the two, kind of like, stuff like that because I'm not using a ton of vocabulary there, but if you played up those kind of three basic kind of concepts there between the scalar, the chromatic, and then the kind of playing in two, you know, that's kind of a nice thing to do too, and it just kind of gives things a nice kind of a different flavor. And I guess kind of point that out because, like, I don't know. It's something that sometimes I don't hear. The playing in two sometimes I find could be a really cool thing to do, and I don't hear a ton. I don't always hear it a ton of times with the more kind of like Americana stuff. Like I hear a lot of blues guys do it. I'll hear a lot of jazz guys do it. I don't hear a lot of kind of like Americana rockabilly guys do it as much. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I'm not paying attention or something. But sometimes playing in two can just give that. Oh, that's a nice new different color that I hadn't thought about. And it doesn't require really any vocabulary learning. It's like it's just doing the same thing, you just play into two. And it can be super handy if you're playing really fast swing lines. You know, if you're playing like really, really fast, playing in two can sometimes kind of like you can really concentrate on your right hand and kind of give your left hand a break, and you're not changing strings so much, so it's a little bit easier to keep the smoothness. You know, that's what I'm always about. Like keep it in time, and keep it in tune. You know, those are kind of the two things that I like to focus on.
Absolutely. I mean, that's our job as bass players. And it's interesting you mentioned keeping the smoothness, because right before you mentioned that, one of our audience members, Cloudberry, wrote smooth for your role. And you got like, you know, some hand claps.
I said thank you.
Fires and all that. People love your playing, so you should play more, you know. So we're gonna hear you play a little bit more later on. I think that the band, I mean, people mostly associate you with Upton, or as far as playing goes, is with amazing Royal Crowns.
Sure.
Am I right?
No, that's absolutely correct. That's
okay. And so and that band is your first band, right? I mean, first band with upright bass.
Yeah, and it was the first probably the second kind of like more serious band for me. I was in a band before that was more indie rock stuff. I was playing bass guitar in that band, but this was the first band that really started like, you know, recording. This was a band that clearly had an objective, you know, to get out there and play and record, and had the right, you know, they wanted to go for it, and I wanted to go for it too. So that was the first band that really did it. So it was definitely the first band I played double bass in. I learned, you know, principally what I know from playing in that band. I learned a lot of other stuff too along the way, but that was where I started from. It was definitely, like I said, sink or swim, trial by fire, I guess you say, or something like that. Just get in there and play and figure it out. And, you know, luckily got to meet Sleep of the Beat and show me how to do the kind of the 2-beat rhythm there to help me out, figure out triplets and everything else based on that one little technique he showed me. So yeah, that's basically where I started from. Yes, that was really kind of basically my first real band. Yeah, absolutely. It's actually definitely the first upright band. Absolutely.
And so you've been, for how long the band was together? Like,
yeah, about 7 years. From about 94 to just about, or late 93 to about August of 2001. Sorry. Yeah, it was about 2001.
So 8-9 years or something?
Yeah,
and you have, like, if I'm correct, like 2 studio albums and 1 live album, right?
Yeah, we got the 2 studio records. This is the first one. This is called Royal Crowns, and then there's the one called Royal with the fish on the cover. And then there's a live record called Payback Live. And then we did a handful of singles. We did like our first single. A local guy in Providence helped us fund that record. And then there was another single we did with an Anthony Alsgain cover. It's kind of neat. And then we did the Sub Pop one, which was kind of neat too. That kind of came a little bit later. I think that the song from the Sub Pop single, I believe those are from the actual Royal sessions, if I'm not mistaken. They were on that record, but they were from that session. I forget what songs they were off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I think they were 2 songs from that session, but not on the Royal record.
And so I always thought it was the interesting thing about the name, because the band changed the name kind of in the middle of the whole career, right?
there was confusion because we were called the Royal Crowns, and then there was a band getting very popular called the Royal Crown Review out of California. So there was some confusion between the names. So we settled on that's why we originally became the Amazing Royal Crowns, to try to get that. But then that wasn't really working either. So then it became, the Amazing Crowns, to get rid of the royal part of it. Now it was different enough from the Royal Crown Review, and it was an agreement that seemed to work for everybody.
But you named your album Royal. I thought that was pretty cool.
Right. Well, that was a long time ago, and we were still a little upset about the whole thing. So we thought it was a funny thing when we'll just call the record Royal. I don't know. So I don't know. Yeah. So that's what we were thinking there. Is definitely calling the name Royal.
I really thought it was really cool. Like when I saw it, I was yeah. All right, still Royal. Yeah, I mean, we're people confusing those two bands. I mean, you kind of came out around the same, maybe a little bit later than them.
To be perfectly honest with you, in retrospect, yes, I do believe there was some legitimate confusion. There was actually one time we were on a gig, we were on tour, we were playing in, I don't remember where, I remember it was in Colorado, I think it was in Denver. We were playing a place that we hadn't played before. It wasn't the theater that's there in Denver. I think the theater is called the Bluebird or something like that. It wasn't there. But we walk in, and it's this pretty, nice, restaurant bar. And on the stage is, a grand piano. So, they normally have more, probably, jazz bands or a swing band. Swing band, the swing thing was really happening then. And we were actually whispering to ourselves, do these guys think we're the Royal Crown Review? They're gonna hate us. We never found out if we thought the confusion was real or not. But I do remember we asked ourselves. So I think there was some legitimate confusion. It's fair to say, in retrospect, yes, there probably was some confusion between the names. And that's just a funny story. That's not really the story I'm telling to make my point. But I do think that's just a funny story. But I do think there may have been some confusion.
And then, I mean, you guys are more punk and more rock, I'd say.
Sure.
But
to somebody who doesn't know, I mean, if you never heard that music, you probably heard the two bands, you'd be like, they're kind of basically the same. If you were completely ignorant, anything about that style of music, you're like, no, they're kind of similar, But you're right, I know what you mean. For us, no, they've got the horns, they're doing a totally different thing. There's much more of a swing element to what they're doing, and we were doing somewhere between a neo rockabilly and those kind of more aggressive punk sound. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask you. How were you describing your sound?
Yeah, as far as with the Royal Crowns.
No, just your band, Amazing Royal Crowns or Royal Crowns or whatever you want to. Amazing Crowns.
How would I describe it to somebody who never heard the band? Yeah, I would say that it's definitely super rooted in rockabilly and traditional music, but yes, it has a lot of elements of punk music, definitely. I think Jason, the singer, was always trying to write lyrics that were outside of that kind of genre. I mean, he would write songs about, some of the themes were very much within that, what you would expect a rockabilly band to write about. But he would also write other things too. You listen to songs like Shivered in the Corner and stuff like that, and he's really talking about some different themes that are a little bit outside of it. It's definitely about urban life and things like that, which is a very, I guess, kind of a rockabilly kind of term, or rock and roll term in general, or something to write about in general. But Shivered in the Corner is a really good example of something that's a little bit outside of what he was writing about. I mean, he had other songs too, but that's a really good one that really comes to mind. Is Shiver in the Corner is not kind of the lyrics behind that song are not your kind of typical, not a typical theme you find in rockabilly. It's kind of these drug addiction and bars and stuff like that. A little bit different of a theme going on there.
A little more 90s lyrics.
It's a little more social commentary a little bit, So he certainly wasn't afraid to delve into those territories, or even just have fun with the genre. Hat size. Obviously, he's having fun with the genre. I'm not looking at anything else. He's looking at your hat size. He's obviously having some fun with the genre as well.
Would you say that a whole neo swing movement kind of help you out, like as a band, or not?
Yeah, it definitely helped us out. It helped and hurt us. Did both at this, not at the same time. We got to ride the wave, and I think we definitely suffered on the back end of that movement too. And also, we were really we were also really associated with a lot of the ska bands at the time. We did some touring with the Bosstones. We did a tour with the Pie Tasters. So we did a lot of gigs with ska bands. In fact, whenever we played locally, we always made sure we had ska bands on the bill. So yeah, definitely associated with the swing thing, and it definitely hurt us. It definitely helped us on the way up, and it probably hurt us a little bit on the way down, especially towards the end of that. I mean, in retrospect, when you look back at like music, in my opinion, this is just from my perspective from being there at the time. By the late 90s, but more like the early 2000s, the music really started taking on a much more heavier tone, and those bands were becoming much more popular. It became much more about like, I think like Limp Bizkit became like really massively popular. And there was another band called the Deftones that were just massively popular at that time. And I mean, I don't remember. I just remember hearing the Deftones live. It's pretty impressive that sound is pretty impressive that it got popular, because I just remember being very dissonant. It's like, wow, I can't believe that's actually people are into that. I mean, I think it's great. Like, wow, that's bordering on difficult listening there. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a compliment. Like that people actually were getting into something that kind of heavy and aggressive. But it certainly didn't help us out. And I think some of the newer punk bands that would just start, and some of the new rockabilly bands that were coming out were definitely even a lot heavier, much more punk rock than us. I mean, the full-on saturated guitars and stuff was something the Crowns never really did. I mean, Burgess is definitely more of a guitar player based in more like blues and kind of more like rock, kind of typical classic rock kind of music.
And the lineup changed a little bit. Was it just guitar player different, or the drummers?
Yeah, so we had several drummers before we had. We had two drummers. Yeah, we had Nate Moyer was our first drummer. He's on the first record, and then Judd Williams. He's on the second record, and most people do consider Judd Williams the drummer of the Amazing Royal Crowns, because he was in the band the longest. He did the most stuff. He recorded probably more than any other drummer. We also had, actually before Namor, we had Dana Stewart from the Racketeers. He played drums with us for a while as well. So I would definitely throw in Dave. I'm sorry, I take that back. I would definitely throw Dana Stewart in there. He's on some of the recordings, especially on some of the early singles. He's on some of those recordings too. So just before the first record came out, Nate had joined the band shortly before the first record, so he got to do those songs. But all those songs were almost all the songs from the first record were probably played with Dana Stewart as well.
We have quite a few new people here. We have Coffin Bass 666 with thumbs up. We have Mike Law.
Oh yeah. He's a neighbor. He's right down the street.
All right. I figured out it's probably someone
He's a Connecticut guy. So he's local.
So, Mike Law, I haven't seen you before on the Slapstream, so make sure to subscribe.
Yes, definitely do that, Mike. He's a great bass player too. Great blue. He does a lot of blues stuff, so he's a nice mix. He does take some of the rockabilly, applies it into blues playing. He plays with everybody around here.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
And we have Cloudberry, one of our regulars. He's referring to the name. Then there's the rock punk tongue-in-cheek band that goes by Royal Republic. Good Swedish band.
Oh, cool.
I wonder, like, when you talk to your bandmates, do you usually refer to that band as Amazing Royal Crowns, or you just say Royal Crowns, or you just say the Crowns? What do you say?
Sure. So amongst ourselves, I think we always just call ourselves the Royal Crowns. Yeah, we usually just call ourselves the Royal Crowns. Although there was a band that was quite popular out of Canada called the Royal Crowns.
Oh, as well? Okay.
Yeah, there was a band. Actually, that person I was talking about earlier, Spike Katz, was in the Royal Crowns. So him and I have a funny connection there. We were both in a band with the same name. But yeah, so in fact, that was actually one of our biggest arguments for not changing the name. It's like, well, Royal Crown Review, but the Royal Crowns from Canada have been around before any of us. If anybody should be suing anybody, it should be those guys. So anyways, I was just kind of, at the time, that's what we were kind of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I bet it could have, it was upsetting, starting with the band and all of that.
Of course. You put your heart and soul into something, it's like, they say, hey, you can't do that. And it's like, both they had a point. Royal Crown Review had a point. They were a bigger band than us, I think, at that time, definitely. And they had a lot riding on the line too. So, and in defense, and this is coming from them directly. So it's not really us. It's the management. It's the label. There's other people involved with this group now that we have to. That sometimes a lot of the stuff is coming not from us directly, but it's coming more from them. So their hands were tied. They were, I think, on Warner Brothers or something like that. They were on a really big label. They were doing, were they movies and stuff? Were they in like the Mask soundtrack or something like that?
Yeah, I think they did a soundtrack for Mask, like a Hey Pachuco or something. They did like a few cool things.
I mean, that's a legit work there. So like they got a point, and their label had a point too. It's like we can't have this confusion going on. We're investing all this, in you guys. We can't have this other thing running around there confusing people. So from their perspective, I suppose it made a lot of sense.
I can see. It's important to see both perspectives. Mike Law, actually, he wrote that he was the guy that messaged me to get you at the show. Thank you for that. I had already Jack in mind, but thanks for reminding me of that. I have actually a long list of players that I want to feature. And he also wrote, Jack is a legend of a player and by far the best bass technician I have ever used. And he likes the show. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
How's that scene like over there where you live? Were there always some rockabilly or psychobilly bands, lots of slappers, or not so much?
When I first started playing in the Crowns, there really was not. I mean, so we had just started. Locally is a band called the Gamma Rays that had been around for a really long time. So they had upright bass too. They were kind of more like a neo rockabilly band. They still play actually. Kind of more of a neo rockabilly band, kind of more like in the line of like Stray Cats. And then probably the biggest band at the time locally was, and they still play on occasion, was a bit out of Boston called the Crank Tones. And Johnny Shasha definitely was the top of the game as far as the slap style bass playing went. And I finally got, from playing with the Crowns, I eventually got to meet him. Still know him, still friends. And definitely was good to be able to talk with him a little bit about it. In fact, I think I may have still been playing metal strings when I first time I ever met him. I think I remember having a conversation with him about gut strings very, very early on. When I finally got a chance to see him play. And it was always great to watch him play too, because he had a lot more experience than I was, better bass player. So I learned a lot from watching. And if I learned a lot from watching any bass player, probably more than any other bass player, it's probably Johnny Shasha, because I got to see him more than not. He was in a gigging band called the Crank Tones. He did another R&B version of it too, and I can't remember their name, but they had a saxophone player. So they did a lot of similar 50s, 40s, 50s, maybe a little bit of 60s music, but with saxophone. So it was a little more blues based, a little more R&B based, but he was still incorporating the slap stuff. Maybe not quite as much, but doing it when it was appropriate, for the fast swing, the harder songs that they would play. But yeah, they were like the Crank Tones were probably the big band in the area. The Racketeers with Dana Stewart, that's how we actually got Dana Stewart in the band, was from his band, the Racketeers. But they were like the real Crowns. They were just starting. They were, I would say, and I think they would say the same thing. They were just learning. They were just figuring out stuff too. The guitar player, Tom Umberger, was already very good. And Dana was already a very good drummer. But I remember like the bass player was like me at the time. He was kind of learning on the spot, especially with the double bass.
I don't want to ask you like too much about the amazing Royal Crowns. I'll call you just Royal Crowns.
I don't mind talking about the Crowns. So
I mean, like that's what lots of people want to know, and then and I want lots of people, for all these generations, they're gonna be watching the Slapstream, in the years to come. I want them to know about the band as well. Do you have like any stories or something? What would you say was the highlights of your career with the Crowns? And if you can share some stories that you think would be cool to share.
Yeah, sure. So for me personally, and I think Jason might agree with me as well. I don't know, but for me, I think our favorite tour was probably opening for the Cramps, just because they were so legendary. I mean, I was into the Cramps when I first got into like punk music, but I was just trying to develop my own identity as a person. the Cramps were there with that yellow record, Bad Music for Bad People. Like, it was at the store. Like, you'd see it there. Like, finally someone said, someone's got to buy this record. It has to be good. It can't suck. Look at the album cover. It's got to be good. I have no idea what it is because there's no pictures of the band on it. You know, it's just that yellow album cover with that crazy skull and the big hair. And finally we bought it, and it was like nothing we were listening to because, like, you know, we were listening to like more heavier versions of punk, you know, like the Misfits and Black Flag and Circle Jerks, and, you know, even the Ramones are, you know, it's still got the saturated guitars of the Ramones, you know. But you listen to the Cramps record, it's like these clean guitars, and it's like we were all like listen to that record like, ooh, wow, this is really cool. We all loved that record. So for me, touring with the Cramps was really great. Probably one of the highlights of my career as far as playing with the bands is being able to play with actual legends in my mind anyways. And funny story, I remember on that tour, we actually got to play in Providence, our hometown, on that tour. And I remember calling my buddy Dennis Kelly, who worked at In Your Ear Records, and I said, do you have a copy of Big Beat from Dadsville, the new record by the Cramps? Do you have that on vinyl? And he said, yeah, I got a copy. I said, can you bring it to the show tonight? I'll pay you later. He said, sure. So we brought the record to the show, and then throughout the course of the remaining part of the tour, I got every band member to sign it. And that's why I wanted that record, because everybody on the stage played on that record. So I got Ivy's autograph, and I got, you know, and I got, you know, Slim Chance's autograph, and Harry Houdini, you know, Drumdini's autograph. And I remember finally getting Lux's autograph. And I don't know where we were playing. It was kind of like I think they just finished the sound check, and I'm all kind of sheepish. I'm like, hey, Lux, can you sign my record? He's like, cool. So he grabs a pen, and he writes it, and then he looks at me and he says, Kniff. That's Fick spelled backwards. And so he wrote Kniff, and he signed his name. I just remember saying, Kniff. That's Fick spelled backwards. So I always thought that was a really funny story. I thought it was a very Lux interior kind of thing for him to do and for him to say. And it's something you kind of expect when you see Lux play, and when you got to see Lux sing, it definitely was part of his personality. I mean, other highlights is, you know, we got to, doing some tours with the Bosstones was really, really great too. You know, because that gave us the opportunity to be playing on big stages every night. So it definitely was a good exposure, a good thing for us to learn kind of how to play on those big stages. Because, you know, playing on the big stage is a little bit different than playing in the club stages. The sound is different. Learning how to get a good sound, how to create a vibe, I think that's a big challenge, especially for young bands where they don't have a ton of experience playing, especially maybe even outside of their own group. They haven't been in a lot of other bands when you're young. Learning how to play on the big stage, how to get a good sound on the big stage, you know, getting used to how it sounds on there, and trust, you know, you're like, okay, it sounds funny up here, but we got to trust that it sounds great out there. So yeah, touring with the Bosstones was great. We got played this in front of really big audiences, which was really, really nice. Yeah, so those were some definitely highlights. I remember and just obviously meeting other bands along the way. I remember on the Cramps tour, we got to play with the Bomboras, who we became really good friends with, which was really great. Yeah, I remember like even on that Bosstones tour, the first one we did, the Dropkick Murphys were on it. They were a pretty new band at the time. They were you could already see the trajectory that band was going to take. But they were on that tour too, so that was kind of cool to meet all those guys and hang out with them.
It seems that for me, like everything that was kind of like was happening with the Crowns was kind of going up and up, and then I wonder why did you guys stop playing?
I think for me, and I think some of the other guys looking back on it might feel similar, is that it just felt like it went up and then it kind of plateaued, and it didn't seem like it was going anywhere. And also, like I was saying earlier, it really felt like the music scene in general was changing. Like it seemed like people's interest in the swing or the more kind of like music like that, especially the ska music, took a really big hit. I think some of the swing bands took a really big hit. I think they would agree with me if they heard me say that like by the time like 2000 started rolling around, the things just started changing in music. And I think for us it became harder. Personally, also, and this is every single member of the band was dead. You know, we were falling into debt. We owed a lot of money. We owed money to we owed money in taxes. So we weren't able to generate enough money at the end of the year to pay our taxes. And we weren't incorporated. We weren't an LLC. We were just whatever I forget what it is. We were all on our own. So the taxes were coming directly to our Social Security numbers. So, Jason and I, being there the longest, fell the hardest into getting to the point like, this is serious. This is a problem now. Like, we're never going to get out of this hole. We're going to need to take a loan out now, like a personal loan, to get out of our tax debt. So that was, unfortunately, that was also part of it. I think the scene was changing. I think maybe we were getting a little frustrated of playing so much and feeling like we weren't really kind of breaking out beyond that. And it just seemed like for me, it seemed like a lot of the music was changing and going in a different direction.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that, since you were there. And you guys stopped playing a couple of years before I moved to the States.
Oh, okay.
And, I moved to the States in 2004 in January. Okay. And I remember one of my first shows, I believe it was my first national tour with Deke Dickerson, that your guitar player, Colonel, came to one of the shows at a rodeo bar in New York. And I thought it was like cool. I was really excited about that whole tour. So everything was like, yeah, it's happening finally in my life. I'm on tour in the US. And are you still in touch with all the guys from the band? Are they still? What are they doing? Are they still into music? Or not?
I haven't really seen Johnny in quite some time. He bounces around a lot. I know he does a lot with there's a lot of antiquing and selling. So I think he travels a lot to shows and stuff and things like that. So I don't really see him as much. Jason, I see on occasion. I still talk with him pretty regularly. In fact, for preparation for the show, he helped me out. I say, hey, look, I'm doing this thing. Can you put it up on the on the Royal Crowns Facebook page and Instagram and whatnot? I'm doing this interview. So he did all that for me, which is good. So he still runs. He kind of runs a lot of the Royal Crowns pages and stuff like that. So, yes, I still talk to Jason pretty regularly. In fact, if I haven't heard from him in a while, I give him a call or he gives me a call. So, yeah, I talk to Jason. Greg Burgess and I were in a band called the Throttles for many, many years. That happened many years after the Crowns, but I was playing with him recently until relatively recently. And I still see him. He lives in Newport, Rhode Island. So he still plays around. He has a band called the Z-Boys, which does really well in this area. They tour a bit, too, so they have records and stuff like that out, too. Judd lives in Boston. I don't really get a chance to see him. I'm about 2 hours from Boston, so I don't really get a chance to see Judd too much. I chat with him on occasion. And then Dana Stewart, I should probably get in touch with him more often, but I still contact him every so often through like Messenger on Facebook and stuff like that. So, yes, in general, I still keep in touch with the guys.
And I think that I've seen that there were like a couple like reunion shows. Do you still plan to do any of those, or
So when the pandemic hit, we were already scheduled to do our first our own show because we had done several other shows, but they were always associated with other groups or other causes. We were going to do our first show, kind of like a reunion show in Providence. We were going to do it at this place called the Met. It's been around forever. Club. We were going to do it there, and then the pandemic hit, so we had to cancel it because that would have been last September is when we were going to do it. So we had to cancel that. So yes, we have done some. We did New Year's Eve opening for the Bosstones in Boston. That was a number of years ago now, and then we did in Chicago. They do a benefit in memory of Eric Kish, who was in Hi-Fi and the Roadburners. Actually, the first band we ever toured with was Hi-Fi and the Roadburners, which was also really cool. And but yeah, they do a memorial concert. They raise money for animals or something like that. It's a good cause. And so we did one of those shows there, one of those Hi-Fi and the Roadburners shows. We did one of those out there in Chicago. And then a couple years back, we did another Bosstones one in Providence, this outdoor thing. It's really cool. There's some neat footage of that people can find online. We did that show. So we did those 3 shows, and then we were going to do our own, and then the pandemic happened. So unfortunately, all our plans for that are on hold for now. And probably gonna wait a little bit longer before we start talking about doing anything like that. But yeah, I think there is probably something in the future for the band to do something again. Hopefully, relatively soon. We're probably talking a year or two. You might guess if I had to venture.
Yeah, it would be nice to do something and more profitable, so you don't own taxes. And if you can do a tour or a new album or something, I'm sure that people would, you still have like a kind of strong base, like a fan base for a rockabilly band. So
yeah, it's nice to hear from people, and we do hear from people regularly. I hear from people regularly who are fans of the band from locally and from abroad too. So it's great. I met a person from Tralles, Spain, who found me on Facebook, and I chat with him quite regularly now. He's in a band too, so I talk with him quite a bit. So
maybe it's time for a world tour.
Yeah, or at least go to Spain.
Besides the CROWNS, I know you played like with a few bands. Like you played with Soapbox.
Soapbox Saints is the current thing I'm doing.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about that band and the other bands that you played? Played with over the years.
Yeah. So we'll work from the Soapbox Saints, and we'll just kind of work backwards, I guess. Yeah. So the Soapbox Saints is a group. It's a trio. It's the singer-songwriter's name is Billy Moretti, and the drummer is Russ Dowley. Both guys live relatively close in this area. We're kind of like a Providence-based band, I guess you would say, Providence, Rhode Island-based band. Billy's songwriting style, I find it very interesting. I think he's got a great sense of humor. He kind of reminds me a little bit of he's kind of like the Jonathan Richman. He's got a bit of that kind of Jonathan Richman style of songwriting. He's funny. He's not afraid to make fun of himself. And he's not afraid to write sappy love songs, but also songs that are a little bit more aggressive as well. So the songwriting style, it's definitely kind of more like in a traditional rockabilly sense. The guitar tones are kind of in the area you'd expect them to be. They're nothing super heavy aggressive or anything like that. There's some nice finger picking stuff, nice kind of arpeggiated finger pick lines. Russ is a great drummer. He's got a super great swing feel, so he's got that really classic old style kind of like Slingerland drum sound, and he just sounds like a slinger. So he's got a great touch. He knows when to lay back. He knows when to hit hard. He knows when he's got a great sense of timing and where the song should sit as far as rhythm and tempo and stuff like that goes. That's a fun band. And like I said, Billy writes a lot, and like I said, a lot of his influences are. I mean, he's interesting because he definitely has sometimes a strong influence in bands like, or artists like Roy Orbison and stuff like that. So he's not afraid to write ballads or get kind of weepy from time to time or get sentimental or something like that. But then he has funny songs like A to B, which is about his piece of crap car in high school. We had to punch the dashboard to get the speakers to work, which a lot of people can actually relate to. So it's kind of funny that he's got songs like that as well. So he's got a great sense of humor. He's got a great sense of writing style. And and the songs are, they're in the realms of rockabilly, but there's enough originality and something new there. I think you can hear the roots, but it's also, he pushes the envelope just enough without pushing it too far, not straying too far from the tree. But it's a fun band. It's a good group to play with. They're really great guys, and look forward to doing some practicing with them again, hopefully very, very soon. I was playing with Johnny Carlovale for a really long time. He was a real go-getter. He had a bunch of records out. He still plays in a bunch of bands too. We did a bunch of R&B stuff. Actually, I did a lot of stuff with him, with Johnny Carlovale and Greg Burgess, who was in the CROWNS. Him and I did a lot of. We did 2 recordings with him. He put them out himself. I think you can still find them out there if you look hard enough. You can probably find a CD, or I'm sure if you message him for Facebook, he probably has a couple of CDs. But yeah, we did a couple recordings with him. We did a bunch of shows with him. And then I would just kind of after the CROWNS, I kind of did a lot of gigging work. I did a lot of blues gigs. I played with a lot of blues guys. I played with this great harmonica guy locally. This guy named Greg McKenzie, and I always playing with him because he was grew up the next town over from me, but he had a great knowledge of blues music, and he liked all the good stuff, all the kind of the 50s. He liked just enough of the funky stuff to make the bar crowd happy, and we played it. But his heart was always more into like, you know, the older, more chess singles and stuff like that. So that was a fun band to play with, and he let me play double. He loved the fact that I played double bass and could incorporate the rockabilly slap stuff, because, you know, it was a little bit more kind of like, you know, like Willie Dixon played in that style when he played the blues music. So kind of he liked that fact that it worked, you know, and he always let me do whatever I want. And I learned a lot about playing music and improv from playing with him.
What's your favorite style of music to play?
It, as far as like playing and just having lots of fun, I do. I sometimes kind of like some of that kind of. I mean, I'd probably say some of like the rockabilly stuff, and also kind of like that kind of later 50s, early 60s country stuff, like the country shuffle. I love a country shuffle. Like, I love a good Ray Price country shuffle, and I like playing a lot of that kind of style as far as a bass player, because it's so relaxing and it's so much fun, and it's you know, moves along. The music moves along at a nice enough tempo to be interesting, and allows you to stretch out just enough where it's, you know, you're not interfering with somebody in what they're doing. So yeah, I definitely like playing a lot of that kind of stuff. I really enjoy. I'm starting to get into a lot more kind of like Latin stuff. So I enjoy incorporating some of the slappy stuff that I do into like cumbia, or even like some reggaeton or something like that. I'm not afraid to try it, you know, and go out there and do my best at singing it and playing it, or incorporating what I do into that style, whether it be a regular pop Latino song or like a more kind of like, you know, traditional kind of cumbia or something like that. So I like playing a lot of that stuff, and I find like the cumbia rhythms and the reggaeton rhythms work really well for the double bass, because it's, you know, it's just a nice feel. It's like, oh yeah, why didn't we think of this earlier? It's so cool. So
I like that you're doing that. Are there any recordings of that people can hear you?
Unfortunately, no. I do most of that stuff with this band called the Devilfish, which is kind of more of like a working bar band. We play, you know, exclusively covers with that group, and it's kind of more of a dance band, you know. And so we do mix in a lot of Latin stuff, because a lot of people like to kind of dance that style, even if they don't really know much about it. It's a nice slower rhythm. Sometimes the swing stuff can be too fast for people. So, but we also like to keep the music. That band likes to keep the music up. We don't really play a ton of slow songs, you know, because we like to kind of keep it up tempo. We don't like to be draggy and stuff. It's, you know. So unfortunately, I don't have any recordings of that. I wish I did, but hopefully, again, that band will get out playing again. Hopefully, people get something going. So we have talked about like putting together some sort of like recording or something, just to document what we do.
If you were, you know, exclusively touring musician, you know, this would be a good time. But then I know, since you're super busy with your day job, you know, at Crawl, you don't have too much time recording or, you know, doing songwriting sessions and stuff. Do you also write songs?
I don't really anymore. When I was a young kid, like more like in high school, I would write songs and do that stuff. I haven't really thought about it, or maybe I thought about it a little bit, just from because I got the guitar. I have a guitar again. I fixed up my mom's guitar over the pandemic, so I did that. So I have thought about like maybe trying to write stuff, because like I think I could probably write songs, you know, especially with something like the Soapbox Saints, where it is a little bit, you know, we're writing. It's a thing. Soapbox Saints is a thing. It's a rockabilly band. So there are kind of rules and there structure that you're following. So I have a little bit of help there. It doesn't have to be this original great rock and roll song. The pressure's a little bit off there, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So I thought maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought maybe I could contribute a little something to Soapbox Saints. But I do consider myself, I think like a lot of other musicians who maybe don't quote unquote write, I help out a lot. I think I help out a lot with the songs. Like when Billy has an idea, I'll give him some ideas like, hey, try this, take out this chord, try that chord. Let's change the feel here. So sometimes my songwriting, or lack of thereof, it's a little bit more of like a producer sense. Like, I think this rhythm is wrong, or I don't think that chord's right there. Or sometimes it'd be like with Billy, it's like, I think you should try to make this chord structure a little bit more straight. I hear where you're going, but is this kind of, and then I'll put a quick chord progression. Is this kind of what you're hearing? And sometimes he's like, yes, and sometimes he's like, no. So, but I kind of contribute to the songwriting in that sense. I wouldn't say that I'm writing those songs by any means, but you know, I do try to put my opinion into what we're doing, especially with the Soapbox.
So more like an arranger, I would say so, right?
Arranger, yeah, something I would imagine like a producer would come in, listen to the songs, and be like, yeah, that rhythm doesn't work there. Like, make that faster, make it slower, drag out this part. This part's cool. Focus on that. Pull that out more. Get the lyrics going a little bit more here or something like that. Focus on this theme, not that theme. That kind of thing.
We have some more people here and some new people here that probably missed the first time when you played. I would love to ask you if you don't mind playing, and especially since you mentioned that you're using slap in the cumbia and more Latin. If you can do something in that vibe, I would really appreciate. But it's the show is about you right now, so whatever you feel like sharing.
Yeah, sure. So this is all like really, really rudimental, simple stuff, and I like it because I think anybody, what level of playing they're on, could quickly figure what I'm kind of doing here and incorporate it into their playing almost immediately, which is kind of nice. It gets an instant gratification. So I'll start off and back up a little bit. So I think as bass players, especially in rockabilly, every so often you get asked, or if you're playing rockabilly or even just a more straightforward blues gig, you're probably going to get asked at one time or another to play a rumba. And I think within the rockabilly field, what most people do, and myself included, when they say, okay, well, I'm going to do this in a rockabilly sense, well, how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to go. And that's great. And that works almost all the time. The thing is, like, sometimes, especially maybe sometimes with blues songs, or if you want to make it even a little bit more like Latin-y sounding, or pull it back a little bit, because that's that's aggressive. That's kind of statement making stuff. So sometimes what I'll do when I'm playing in a blues band, or like something where they want something a little bit more, or like the drummer might be doing some really cool stuff. So let's get out of the drummer's way. Let's let him have this moment here. We got this nice ladder. We got this nice rumba going. How can I maybe incorporate a little slap, but kind of add a nice little extra rhythm touch on top of it. And sometimes what I'll do is this. Well, I'll do a pluck and then a slap and then a pluck again. So it's more like wait. I just kind of like that. And I think it's cool if you kind of play it like almost behind the beat. Like you want to, because you got to make that transition from here to there. So it's almost like it's cool because it kind of falls behind the beat. Like you really wait to that last minute to get that in, and it gets that nice draggy blues thing going. So I kind of like that one a lot. And again, it pulls it back a little bit too. So if the band's getting quiet, or if the drummer's playing like something really, really like a lot of like kind of like rim shot kind of like when they do that thing with the stick on top of the snare, and they're doing a lot of that kind of stuff. It allows that rhythm stuff to really develop on the drums, and you're not getting too much in the way with it, but just by doing that. I don't know. I always thought that was kind of cool. I always kind of like that line. And I don't think it really heard anybody kind of do it, so I kind of like that. It's a little something different.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the upright bass, especially. Please keep the bass. I want to ask you something now.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask, I think that the feel and the pocket, it's really important. For us as upright bass players, and we have that kind of like a natural tendency, like to. We're able to push the beat or like to hold it back, for like most of the kids these days, we're talking, something that's completely unimportant, who's listening computerized music. But, for us, that's kind of the essential way how the music breathes, and, the kind of like almost like a heartbeat. So I'm really happy that you talked about that. What I want to ask you now is a little bit about the terminology that you use, like when you talk about slap bass, and are you using that like, you know, single slap, double slap, triple slap, or some other terminology, and what's your take on that? And also, if you don't mind sharing, what are the slap patterns that you're using?
Yeah, sure. So to me, if someone said, well, can you just play like a double slap? To me, I would translate it in my head to mean that they want me to play in two. So they want that kind of just classic, you know, Sun Records, you know. So that's a double to me. Just that. To me, that's the double. To me, the triple, I guess I always thought that was just the triplet, you know. To me, that's just the triple. There is something that you hear a lot, and I think probably like a lot of us, probably the first time I ever really heard it done was from Kevin Smith, which is that kind of drag thing he does. And somebody used to describe that as the rake, you know, you know, and you can do that on shuffle, obviously, too. So I always like that term, the rake, because I always thought that was a really cool term. I don't think I've really heard it used much, but I heard it once, so I thought that was kind of cool. So yeah, it's the only. I think that's probably the only word I've ever heard to describe that kind of like that kind of sound. It's called the rake. So I always thought that was kind of cool. And I think everything else I more or less do is probably based on those three basic strokes. You know, you're kind of like your shuffle. And then faster, I guess sometimes I'll hear people, and this is maybe a little bit more blues term, but you hear like the swinging eights where like that note in between is a little bit closer to the note that comes, I guess you. That kind of thing. And I think sometimes it's almost like a lighter touch. It's almost like it's okay every so often that can come down. Doesn't happen. It's almost, it creates that little skip pattern. You know? I think that's kind of cool, and I do that. Especially, I'll do that quite a bit with the blues bands because it's a little bit lighter. It's a little less intense. The drums sometimes tend to be a little bit more aggressive, sometimes in the blues music. So sometimes that kind of lighter feel just creates a little bit more space. And I like the little swing feel that it creates by not coming down every single time. And when you do come down, it's really close to the note that comes. And I'm not mathematically, musically smart enough to know what that would be, you know. But I always kind of like those kind of patterns, especially when I'm playing something more swingy or bluesy. And really about the other ones too, we was talking about some of the cumbia patterns. You know, I always kind of, what I like about it is it's kind of just like, it's kind of just a form of the double slap, really, you know. So I was like that pattern works so great, and it's such a great way to incorporate a total of the style of music into the slap kind of playing. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done that before, and I just don't really know anybody else who might be doing that kind of thing. But it's a nice pattern that works really well. So yeah, I think just about everything else. I think everything I really do is just kind of based on that. You know, whether it just be the straight, the two, And as far as the triplet stuff, it's all kind of like based on the same stroke. You're just changing, how you're dividing it. You know, whether it be or the hard, that kind of more aggressive, rumba. Or the Bo Diddley. Nah. I guess it's more of a habanero pattern, but yeah, that's kind of like those are the basic strokes that I always use, and I think everything I kind of play is somehow based on that. And sometimes I'll go something really heavy and aggressive, and other times I'll go with a lighter approach on some of the slapping stuff, whether it be that rumba pattern or that swing pattern where I'm not really focused on hitting every single note down on that fingerboard. I'm like, okay, I'm going to miss a couple in there, but it's intentional. I want it to have this light kind of like it just creates a nice swing feel, I think.
I agree with you. I think those little slaps can sometimes really add a texture.
Yeah, just when it comes to
a little vibe.
Yeah,
spice it up.
It gives the bass line a little skip almost.
So you're not using the term single slap at all. It's double slap, triple slap, and triple.
Yeah, that's about it. I don't. Yeah, I mean, if you said to me a single slap, I would translate it in my head. Okay, he wants a shuffle, or this person wants a shuffle or a swing. So they want something along those lines. That to me would be a single. And like I said, that really compressed one, that runk kind of sound. That I don't know. The only term I heard for that once was called the rake. So I thought I'd share that with you. Somebody called, that's called the rake. And I was like, oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah, there's like different terminology, that and different people use it. I'm trying to, get all that, what people use, and then kind of figure out one way to to have like a certain system. I'm not sure if that's a good idea or bad, but I'm gonna do it.
No, I like the idea. I definitely like the idea of it because you play classical music. It's important to know what the difference between an up bow and a down bow is, and those are the terms we're going to use. I'm sure it changes in different languages, but I know in English it's called an up bow and it's called a down bow. So.
Absolutely. When you were talking about, are you using bow at all when you play?
Not when I play these days. I have on rare occasion in the past. I used to practice quite a bit with the bow on my own, especially like after the crowns when I really kind of want to learn like the fingerings and stuff. I actually was practicing quite a bit with the bow. Not really practicing etudes or anything like that. It was just like playing slow scales and playing them in tune and like really focusing on the fingerings that I'm going to use and making the jump from this position to that position. That was more the level of the bowing that I do. I wish I should do more of it because I think it's really great for your intonation. I think it's also good for your timing as well. And I think it's something I would encourage every bass player to do more of. And I think most bass players would agree, like if they messed around with the bow and at least done that part of studying, like, okay, just practice slow scales. Most people, I think, would say that, yes, there is a huge benefit that can come from that. Even if you never use that thing live, even if you just do it in your own practice space or in your own room, there is a huge benefit that can come from it.
I completely agree with you. And that's what I tell to my students, even if they want to play only rockabilly or psychobilly, learning how to use a bow and control the intonation with a bow, it's a night and day, really. You can actually hear those notes and being able to control them and quickly, fix the intonation if you have to. I mean, then we all have to. People loved your little masterclass here. I have to say that. We have Paul from Aloha from Kauai. Bob Boy wrote, "So glad my student bailed so I can watch live." Paul Berry said that tune you played is like a Donkey Kong. Law, love you, like fabulous. Carolyn D, very informative, and watching his interaction with his slapping, with his head bopping. Arana gave you some crowns. And
all right.
Casey, great explanations with handshakes, and Carolyn was the one actually noticing the cool crown emojis as well. So, do you teach?
I don't. I mean, I'd be the kind of person like, hey, can I come over and hang out and, pick your brain a bit? Sure. But I don't do any sort of formal teaching or anything like that. I mean, I'm not opposed to it, but it's not something I do. now or anything like that. I haven't done a ton of that. I mean, I've helped people out. I mean, I've definitely helped some friends out, like, hey, let's get together and, you know, talk about some stuff or, you know, something like that. I know, you know, if somebody, but yeah, that's about it, you know, not really. Not opposed.
Well, if people want to get lessons from you, how should they get in touch with you through Facebook, Instagram?
Yeah, probably the best if they ever want to like pick my brain about something, or even just ask me a question through Facebook about something, whether it be about bass or setup or amplifiers or anything like that. Yeah, people are always welcome to send me a quick message through Facebook. I'm, you know, I'm pretty quick on those things in general. 24 hours. 24
Well,
hours.
I'm going to ask you all those questions now, so you know you can you can just watch this. You know, I'm not sure if this is going to generate more people interested in getting in touch with you and picking your brain about bass stuff, or less if you know show everything today. So I want to be focused a little bit more on your other career, your day job, because
Sure.
you've been a luthier and bass repairman for a long time now, right? Since early 2000s.
Yeah, probably about 2003, 2004. You know,
So almost 20 years.
Almost, yeah. It's been almost
Okay.
20 years, yeah, that I've been doing this as the full-time job. Yeah.
So that's probably your main career, you know, through your life, I would say so.
Sure.
I would like to know, how did you get into that? I know that the Upton is not your first luthier gig. So how did you get into bass repair, and how did you get basically these, how did you change your career? What was the decision?
Yeah.
And then I want to know everything about it.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. I used to work for this company called Mars Music. After the Crowns broke up, I was still playing, doing a lot of like local stuff, keeping busy musically. And I was working at this place called Mars Music, which was kind of like Guitar Center, but more varied. They had band instruments, and they actually had double basses. Actually, that what drew me to the place. Like I said, well, if I got to work somewhere, I think I'd like to work there. Because they have the band instruments there as well. I kind of like the fact that it's not just, you know, guitars and basses, you know, bass guitars and keyboards and PAs. They got the band stuff. I thought that was kind of cool. It was a pretty big place. So I went and applied for a job there. And actually the Crowns thing helped out because one of the managers like recognized me from the Crowns. He's like, yeah, I gave him a shot. What the hell? So I started working there, but unfortunately the company folded about a year and a half or so into that job. So I was unemployed and, you know, practicing a bit on my own, you know, bass and stuff like that. And I started taking lessons with this guy, Dennis Frady, and he was a classical guy, you know, mostly. You know, he was a working musician too. He could read like really well because he played classical music. So he got a lot of jazz gigs because he could just read anything. You know, people have told me like this guy's like probably one of the best readers I've ever met in my life. You know, he could just read anything you throw at him. He's right there, no problem. So as I was studying with him to play, because I really want to learn more about the bow and I really want to get just this. I want really dry, boring bass lessons. That's what I want right now. And I just want to go really back to the basics of learning the bow, learning scales, stretching out, using the whole fingerboard, playing, you know, interval patterns, all that kind of stuff. And he was great for that because that's what he liked doing too. He was like, let's start right at the beginning. You know, Samandal book and all that kind of stuff. So I started there, but he had told me, he's like, hey, I just started working this new job and stuff like that. And I was telling him, well, I'm laid off. He's like, hey, you might want to, this company I work for is pretty cool. They're a distributor for string instruments, you know, violins, cellos, violas, and they do basses too. And it's like they need an in-house position for setup and repair. Would you be interested? I said, yeah. I said, well, send him your resume. Okay, I'll send him my resume. So luckily I had a really good friend. And I told her, I said, hey, and she was always really good about this. She made resumes for all her friends. She was so good at it. I said, can you make me a resume for this job? She's like, yeah, sure. So, you know, we put together the resume and I got the job, you know, so, and that's how I met Eric Roy, who works here. And I think I remember Eric telling me, you know how you got the job? And I said, no, it's because you were honest. We asked you, it's like, I forget how Eric put it. It's like, we asked you the question, like, well, is there anything here that you don't think you can understand or know? And I was like, well, I'll be honest with you, I've never done this before. So it's like, I'm not afraid to work on my own base, but yeah, I'm going to probably make a lot of mistakes, And he's like, oh, good. Okay, great. So he hired me because I think I was honest about it. Like, hey, I'm not like some guy who thinks he knows it all. I think I want to come here and I want to learn. I want to start at the very beginning and work my way up. And that's what it was. We started off like, really basic stuff, like, how to put the peg dope on the pegs for the violins so they actually stay in tune, the cellos. And then it eventually worked into like all the other stuff, because the instruments that were coming from overseas, they really weren't like set up. They were like left raw intentionally so that either A, we could do it, or B, the shop that was buying the instrument could do that. So a lot of times, especially the violin shops, they wanted to sell basses, but they had no capacity to set them up. So we ended up doing a lot of bass setup. We ended up doing lots of fingerboards, and lowering nuts, and, adjusting bridges and sound posts and all that stuff. So I learned a lot about doing setup right from there, and also repairs. Your instruments would come in and they get broken. So it's like, well, we can't just let it hang here. We gotta fix it and like sell it or do whatever with it. We can't just let it sit here broken forever. It's something outside of the fact that it's got a crack in the top, we can fix it and it's still a perfectly playable cello or bass or violin. So did a lot of like basic repairs there as well. Not afraid to take a top off and complete a crack or things like that. So I learned that all from there. And then Gary Upton was a client of Eric because Eric was in distribution. Gary's in retail. So Eric knew Gary, and I met Gary through Eric because I was setting up some of the basses for Gary. Like he would do some of the other ones, like the fancy ones, and then like a lot of the entry level stuff I would, do, because he has limited time. He was a one-man shop back then. So I kind of met Gary through there, and that's how I made the switch from JR to Upton. And it was great too because we focus mostly on basses here. We do some cellos as well, but mostly basses. And we've done some violin stuff in the past here, but it's mostly basses.
Thanks for sharing this story. And how often do you have like a slap bass players as clients?
Regularly. I mean, we definitely do more with jazz and classical. I would say actually probably like jazz and bluegrass are probably our 2 A and Bs. Classical and rockabilly are probably about tied, actually. We actually get quite a few calls for people who want to play in the slap style, or whether it be like rockabilly, or like sometimes on rare occasion you've got a guy who wants to maybe do more gypsy jazz stuff, which again shares a lot of the same techniques. So yeah, we actually get quite a bit of it. In fact, I just had a phone call the other day with a guy saying, I want to come in and I need this bass set up for rockabilly, and I'm a bass player, but I don't know much about the style, so I'm going to need to learn. I'm going to need some gut strings, I've been told, and all this stuff. And I said, yeah, well, come on in, bring your bass in. We'll walk you through the whole process, and I'm sure we can give you a setup that's going to be really great for the style music you want to play. Rockabilly setups is like, for me personally, the way I do them is they're different than I would do any other bass setup. As far as how I set the string heights and the ratio of the string from where the string sits in relation to the other strings. I find for me to make it very comfortable and easy to play, it'd be a very unorthodox setup for a jazz player or less, or an orchestra player, obviously as well.
What is the difference?
For me, really, I like to have all the strings to be basically the same string height. And the E string, for me, is like 1 millimeter to 0.5 millimeter higher. That's it. As far as string heights. And as far as fingerboards go, if I know the guy's only playing rockabilly, I will try to get the E side of it a little bit more rounder. Then the treble side, so the E string almost sits a little bit lower. I don't want to create like a Romberg bevel on the fingerboard. I would never do that. But kind of like getting that concept, applying that concept, I think, of the Romberg bevel where that E string sits a little bit lower. I feel when you come back down on that fingerboard, it actually works. It's more comfortable. So those are some of the things that I would do. The fingerboard shape is wouldn't really affect anybody except maybe a classical musician negatively. But the string height seems to be the big one. Like, because normally it goes against conventional wisdom. You know, the E string is the biggest string and it has more oscillation. So normally you would want that string to be higher off the fingerboard. The G string doesn't move as much. It's much tighter. It's a skinnier string. It's louder. It's more in your range of hearing. It doesn't need to be as high off the fingerboard, so we can get that lower. So when you're trying to balance a bass for tone, the string heights are going to sit very different. But the problem is if you do that for slap, for most players, not all, but for most players, now by the time they get under the G, the D, A, and E string are now too high. And I hear this from customers all the time. I'm trying to do this, and like, by the time I get the top string high enough, the other ones are just so high. Or it's vice versa. They're like, I got the E, A, and D. I got the E and A good, but the D and the G, I just can't get my finger underneath it. It's not working for me. It's like, yeah, I know. Bring it in. We can adjust that and fix it for you. As far as sound posts or anything like that go, I don't do anything different outside of what I would do for a jazz or a bluegrass player. Relatively close to the bridge, not underneath it, but relatively close, a little further towards the outside. Try to get a little accentuation out of the lower strings. That's really about it.
So the main difference is basically the string height.
Yeah, and the ratio from string to string. So
Okay.
so if you're measuring from the bottom of the string, so like I personally, I've been told I play a little bit lower. I like that string at the bottom of the string. I'm measuring with a ruler from the end of the fingerboard, and if I'm taking a ruler behind the string, I'm measuring to the bottom of the string. For me, it's about 8 millimeters. I want the same on the D string. I want the same on the A string, and then the E string, I might push it up to about 9 just to get a little bit more pop out of it in terms of tone, and it's probably more in my head than anything else, but it makes me feel good, so that's what I do.
How about the bridge?
Bridge, nothing really too different outside of, obviously you're getting those string heights from the bridge. Nothing really too extreme. Maybe a slightly thinner bridge because they're more likely to be using lighter tension strings, so you can get your tolerances down there. A lot of thoughts on that. Some people say a thinner bridge is more bright sounding, and a heavier bridge is darker sounding. So you might want to factor that into your setup when you're working with a client. They say, I like this bass. I want it to play rockabilly, but it's also really, really bright. So if there's a way you could darken up the tone? I mean, obviously the strings are pretty dark to begin with, but if you could go a little further, that'd be great. I might look at making the bridge. I might actually leaving the bridge tolerances a little bit more like feet, the width of the feet. I might leave them about what I would do for a jazz or an orchestral player playing regular metal strings. Probably do something like that. Those are small little adjustments. I don't think they make a huge difference in tones. They would have called marginal gains.
So rockabilly would be kind of like a much closer setup. I mean, slap-based setup would be much closer to jazz setup than classical.
You know what? I think I might disagree with you a little. I might actually.
No, this was my question from your perspective.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because a lot of the classical guys, what I do is because they want that. So outside of the roundness of the fingerboard, which I wouldn't recommend for a rockabilly setup, it would work fine. One of my Engleharts I have at home is a super round fingerboard, and it plays fine. The thing is with the classical setup, and maybe I'd be curious about your input on this. A lot of times, I don't like to get that E string up so high because it gets harder to get that separation between on the A string. If the E string is up too high, by the time you get clarity on the A, it's more pointed down towards the D a little bit. So I actually, a lot of times on the E string, I'm actually making that a little bit lower than I would for a jazz player, which actually makes the setup more close outside of the roundness of the fingerboard. It actually makes the string ratio a little bit closer to what I would do for a rockabilly guy.
Yeah, interesting. I'm very interested in that. Especially since you're luthier now, and then you're doing the setup, and I'm always balancing. Since I play lots of slap, but I play a lot with a bow, and I play decent amount of jazz, so I always have to balance it out. Like they want I definitely do not want like G string to be super close, like lots of classical guys do. I mean, solo people, and I don't want as the other strings to be as close as like I don't know, Christian McBride does, or some
right.
I'm like always like, oh, I want this. I want to play the bebop lines, but I don't want to play. I don't want the strings to buzz when I play with the bow, and I need to have that grip for the slap.
Sure.
So it's always kind of like a balancing in between. Everything.
Yeah, I just find with a lot of my classical players in general. So when I'm talking about a lot of setups, a lot of times I talk about like these basic numbers. You know, like I'll say like 5 to 8, and what that means is the G string is 5 millimeters off the fingerboard. The D string is 6 millimeters off the fingerboard. The A string is 7 millimeters off the fingerboard, and the E string is 8. So the difference between the high and low is 3 millimeters. Find this works for most jazz players. Find it works for most bluegrass country players who don't do any slap style. Seems to work quite well for them too. But some of the classical players, I want to get that. Actually, I'm almost looking for more like a little bit higher on the G, and a little bit lower on maybe the E and A. So a lot of times I'll follow numbers that I got from a Gary Carr bass, which was 6, 7, 7, and 8. And it always plays really good. I think the bow, drawing the bow across the E string, you don't have that balance problem as much as you do when you're playing with your fingers with pizzicato, whether it be straight up pizzicato or straight up, slap pulling the strings. I don't think you have. I think you're more likely to have that problem where you might want that higher E string, or maybe not so much rockabilly, but for jazz playing, you kind of want, a lot of times jazz guys sometimes want that E string like really skewed and compared to the G. Not always, it's not common, but I get guys who want that. But for classical, I find you don't need it as much. The bow helps drive that E string a lot more just by that constant sustaining and that constant ringing of the string seems to make up the difference. So I feel I can get it a little bit lower, make the bridge a little bit rounder, get better bow separation, which usually helps most classical musicians, especially when they're going up into the neck for soloing or something like that. So it's just kind of funny how that kind of works out.
You mentioned Gary Carr. Who are the other, famous bass players that you've been working with and, setting up their basses? I know some of the names that you told me before, but I would like you to mention that.
We are some of more well-known clients would probably be like Victor Wooten we made a custom bass for Victor Wooten. Pretty well known. He's more of a slap bass player, but he plays with like the bluegrass guy, the banjo dude there. What's his name?
Bella Fleck. He plays with the Black Fleck.
Idiot, but I know that. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, he plays with Bella Fleck. So a lot of people know him from that probably. So he's a client of ours. John Patitucci is kind of another one. These are guys that are like obviously very well known for their performances, but also kind of known in the kind of like bass musician circle. They're obviously usually very prominently featured in magazines or about the bass. These are big proponents. These are big teachers or promoters of the instrument as well. But yeah, John Patitucci is another one that we have. There's a really pretty well-known bass player. His name is Travis Book. He's a young guy. Plays a band called the Infamous String Dusters. That a lot. He's a player that plays one of our instruments as well. Kevin Smith, who plays with Willie also now High Noon. He has one of our travel basses, and Billy Horton has a bass too. From last I knew, he was playing with Jimmy Vaughn. I think he still is, but he has one of our basses as well. So those are two guys in the rockabilly in the rockabilly circle. Shorty Poole, you might know him. He's a California guy. He's got one of our older ones. It's not one that we made entirely in house. It's one of those kind of crossover ones, but he had one or might still have one. So he's been a customer of ours too.
Yeah, Shorty was playing with Deke Dickerson.
Yes, he's played with him. So he's definitely connected with all those guys, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a great, especially Gary Carr and John Patitucci.
The Gary Carr bass is like right off camera I'm looking at it right now. It's like right there.
Oh yeah! Oh wow!
I'll bring it around. Maybe I'll bring it around a little bit. But it's the one you see him in all the videos he did, like in the 70s and the 80s. All those ones where he had the big beard. That's the bass. It's right there.
Oh wow, that's cool. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about Upton. How many different basses or like models Upton makes, if I can ask it that way?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll go from the bottom and work our way up. So our kind of like regular line of instruments, we have what we call the standard. The standard is what we would call a gamba cornered bass. So a standard, I'm going to just stand up really fast here. I have one. Yeah, around the camera a little bit here. The gamba corner is like this. It doesn't have a violin corner. It sticks out, so we call it a gamba corner. The gamba corner, that's our standard bass there. That's our standard. It's available in all 3 builds. You can get that as a full-on plywood. You can get that as a hybrid, and you can get it as a carved bass too. It's all built off the same platform, basically. And then from up there, we have what's called the Bohemian. The Bohemian is also built on the same platform as the standard. It's much more customizable. You get your choice of colors as far as the varnish and things like that. You get input on tuners, things like that. We try to make the Bohemian a fancier version of the standard. You get to choose more options, if you will. I hate to use car-like terms, but it's the best way to explain it. And then another popular bass we sell is one called the Brescian. That would be like our Italian style or British style bass. It's a very large violin pattern bass. What I refer to as like a panormal pattern. It's much more like that. It's a big airy bass. We call it like a 7/8. It has a standard string length on it, but it's a bigger bass. So it's a great like a lot of jazz guys like it who don't want to maybe for doing like jazz brunch where they don't have to play loud. So a lot of times they can get away without an amplifier. So they love that bass for that. Its companion would be the Mittenwald. That again is a gamba cornered bass. It's another very large instrument, like a 7/8 or a larger size instrument, like the Brescian. So if you don't like violin corners but you want a bigger bass, there's always the Mittenwald. Then moving up from there, we have some fancy. We do have a Gary Carr bass that we make. That's modeled off, I think, off the one that Jim Ham made for him. It's modeled off of that. We have that instrument. Actually, it's a great jazz bass too. It's got a really gnarly, like aggressive sound. So it actually makes a really great like that kind of like mid-rangey jazz bass. If you want that kind of like tone, I have often joked here before, like, what's the best bass for jazz? The Gary Carr bass, which Gary Upton thinks is kind of funny. But there's that one, which is great for soloists, or like I said, it also works great for jazz. And then there's also we have a bass, we have a Klotz bass, which is another kind of more Germanic kind of pattern instrument. It's a smaller instrument, but it's really wide. It's kind of interesting. We don't make a ton of those, but people sometimes ask for those. And then we have the Concord. The Concord's interesting because it's modeled after basses that were actually made kind of in this area in Concord, New Hampshire. There was a maker named Abraham Prescott, he's from like the late 1700s into the 1800s. He's really well known for his organs, for making pipe organs and things like that. But before that, he was really involved with making double basses. And he was able to create a big industry for himself because churches wanted these larger instruments to kind of recreate low sounds. So he was really involved with making these very large, grand double basses. I have one right next to me right here off camera. But yeah, the Concord bass is pretty popular too, and it's got a funny shape. It's got what's called a Busetto corner on it, so it's a little bit of a different shape. So yeah, that's the basic models, like the standard Bohemian, Brescian, Mittenwald, Klotz, and then the Carr, and then the Concord. So there's a lot of different options, and we have one called a Cavani, which is another Italian pattern bass, and then we have a couple custom things that we can do too. So we can do custom builds, and we have many times.
What is the most what is the favorable model for slap bass players?
I'd probably say our standards, because you get everything you kind of get in a lot of the other basses. It's just more stripped down. You know all the same components. Ebony fingerboard, German tuners. It's just like that bass. You don't have a ton of choice on the colors and stuff like that. But for a rockabilly bass player, if I know they're playing rockabilly, I will set the bass up for rockabilly. I'll throw up my standard numbers that I would normally use for a student or a beginner bass player, and I would say, okay, let's get this set up exactly. If I know that's what they're going to do, then I'm going to set it up for them for that style, for that kind of music.
Are you kind of to-go guy, like for anything slap related at the Upton?
What's that?
Are you kind of the main guy for anything slap related at the Upton?
So. Yeah, I would say so. And I think it comes in handy here because there's obviously a lot of people who know how to set up basses for that, but it's not as many. There probably aren't as many as us as there are like orchestral guys or jazz guys or even bluegrass guys. So I think we're a little less common in the field to have somebody who kind of like knows the style well, but also plays it on a regular basis. And that's kind of a nice thing to have, just because I think you got that sense of like when somebody's frustrated with their instrument or their live sound, I think working with somebody who works in that area can sympathize with their frustrations, and I think that goes a long way for them, because I think sometimes they may not get that from somebody who just does not have a lot of experience with the music. And the nice thing about working here too is I feel like I get a lot of experience working with a grand range of players from classical music. So yes, I'm not a classical musician, but I've worked enough with these guys where like I feel like I can empathize with them, like when they're having problems. Like, okay, this is the problem. How do I address it? Where is it? Let's localize it. Let's fix it, and let's make this guy happy. Let's give this guy what he's looking for. So I feel like that helps. And I think the rockabilly thing is just an extra thing, because again, I guess it's kind of like classical music in that way. It's a very specific thing. It's a little bit different than the other areas, you know. So sometimes it's nice to have somebody who can empathize with the client who's having a problem.
What are the other guys? You know, all the classical and jazz clients of yours, or even bluegrass. What do they think about slap bass? Have you ever talked to those guys about it, or like, you know, I've always wondered those things. I mean,
yeah. So some people know my history, like they, you know, because it's been, you know, we're pretty active on the social media stuff. So some people know a little bit about my background, so they know like I came from that. So some people want to talk about it. Some people don't know me at all, and I don't offer up any information as to what my background is if I don't know them at all. If they want to ask me, I'm not going to lie to them, obviously. I will gladly talk about anything they ever want to talk about. But yeah, it definitely comes up. People ask, oh, you do a lot of that slap stuff. Can you show me something? Or, hey, I want to show you something I'm working on. Or, you know, what do you think about this? So definitely people ask me about it. And then there's other people who don't. And some people know who I am from, you know, probably a lot from like the Upton Bass, you know, website and from our YouTube channel and other things like that. And some people like know me from the CROWNS still. So I still get a little bit of that. So yeah, I don't think anybody I don't think there's any bias or anything like that towards, you know, towards the background I have or anything like that, which is good.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
As far as your bass playing goes, like, who are the biggest influences on your bass playing?
As far as like my overall kind of like, you know, playing style, it's like who I probably sound more like. I mean, or who I'd like to like model myself after. I always thought like Dorsey Burnett was really great, or like those guys. There were a couple different guys. I'm embarrassed to say I can't pull up their names off the top of my head. The guys who played with Bill Haley. I know there were two of them, if I'm not mistaken. Two primary ones.
I mean, there was four. There were more, but you know, the two main guys are Al Rex and Marshall Lytle. Right,
Marshall Lytle. Yeah, I love that sound. And I definitely went back and listened to those records when I got into slap playing. Those records were like, that guy's just solid. It is in the pocket. It's like if I just do that, I should be fine. I should be able to get plenty of work. So I think that kind of thing. Dorsey Burnett, for some reason, I always love those Johnny Burnett records, and I always love that thing he does where he just goes back and forth between the 1 and the 5, but he's not going up to the 5. He's going down to that. It's like, oh, that's great. It's so simple, but it's just there. It's like he's not stepping on anybody's toes. He's playing a great rhythm. He's solid as a rock. So I always thought that was really great. I love Willie Dixon. I just can't play anything like the guy.
Yeah. You know, Johnny Burnett stuff is awesome. Most of that Johnny Burnett.
I'm not even trying to play like that guy. It's like I learned a couple of the licks. You know, it's like I could. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know how to incorporate it. Like it doesn't sound natural when I play. Like when he does, it's like, oh, that's the best bass line ever. And it's like I try to do something like it. I was like, it sounds stupid. What are you doing? Just go back to doing what you do. So I kind of I had to get away from it because I think everyone wants to be like Willie Dixon. Why wouldn't you want to be like that? I love his music. I love listening to his playing. So I have to mention it, but I wouldn't say it's like a big. If it's an influence on me, it's subconscious one. If I'm doing something that's really Dixon sounding, so, that's a very kind of. I think that'd be like it's ingrained somewhere from just. It's not intentional. My style is definitely much more like from that simple stuff, or I know on one of the Muddy Waters records there was something called Big Crawford. You know, it's like that's kind of more my style. You know, really solid in the pocket, aggressive. But a lot of times when he's doing the slap stuff, it's very, very straightforward. It's right on that beat. You know, and he does a couple little kind of little herky jerky things on some of those those real early Muddy Waters recordings, which I always really liked too. So I kind of heard when I heard some of those records, it definitely kind of like ripped off some of that stuff. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like that was really
yeah. Ernest Big Crawford was another cool one. I just wanted to mention that most of that like 1/5 thing is actually Bob Moore with Johnny Burnett.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, on the recording,
because it's a studio thing, right? So they were probably replacing like because I know the whole story is like a lot of that stuff is supposedly not Paul Burleson. I think in fact I've ever seen some footage of Paul Burleson
Trading Martin, yeah,
on a television show, and I'm not trying to sound like a jerk here, but he got a little exposed. It's like I don't think that's the dude on the record.
Well,
but anyway.
There's also like a one, I think a TV appearance like where they have Bill Black's brother on the bass.
Yeah. He's not even playing the line right.
Johnny Black, yeah.
And like the song's like he's playing something totally different. It's like, but it's obviously not it's obviously not live. I don't think so. Like, it's like got to be there playing the part. So,
what would you say were for you the most essential slap bass recordings?
Yeah. So for me, number one was definitely those first Sun sessions with Elvis. I mean, I thought that was a drummer the first time I heard it. I thought that clicky stuff was a snare drum, and I think a lot of other people have too. But there's something about that recording is that they still sound like, to me, they still sound magical. And I know that probably sounds cliche or whatnot because I know it, but it's true. Those recordings exist and last, and we still talk about them for a reason. There's something to sound. So as far as recordings, yeah, those early Sun sessions with Elvis before the drums were really incorporated and the piano and other instruments were incorporated, those first handful of singles, I just love the sound of that bass, and I think it sounds so great because it is just so stripped down. It's 3 instruments, so you can really hear everything, even with the limitations of the studio and the recordings and techniques at the time. You can still really hear everything. As far as the clean crispness goes, those early Bill Haley recordings are obviously fantastic. Again, I know a lot of other people use that as source material, probably for a reason because they're just so great. I'm trying to think here. What else? I heard some really nice sounds on on a Steve Earle record, his bluegrass record, one with Mike Bubb. I always thought the sound of that bass sounded really good on that record too. I mean, it's not.
Did you talk about slap? Yes, that's Mike Bubb.
Yeah, it's Mike Bubb, and I always thought his playing on that record was really quite good. And I thought the bass sounded really nice on that recording, and that whole record has a nice, really warm recording sound in general. I always like the sound of that record too. I remember hearing some really good bass recording on some old Matt Curtis singles too. I had a Matt Curtis record or something like that, and I remember the bass sounds on that being really quite good as well. So I remember I don't know who the kid was playing bass on that recording, but I remember being quite good. Even those really early Eddie Cochran singles with 20 Flight Rock. I remember having some sort of repro single of that, probably something that was made in the 70s or 80s. But I remember thinking that the bass sound on 20 Flight Rock was always really great, quite good too. So those are the recordings I was probably listening to when I was really trying to figure out how to play in the style. So those are probably still some of my favorite recordings of it in general. Another one that it's not the first Brian Setzer swing record, but it's the first one when he really incorporates the slap bass. It's with the Louis Prima single on it. That record always sounded really that record at the time made waves too, because I remember that was source material for the CROWNS record.
Jump, Jive, and Wail. Are you talking about that?
Which one?
Are you talking about Jump, Jive, and Wail?
Yeah, the record with that song on it.
Yeah, that's the Dirty Boogie.
The Dirty Boogie, thank you. That was actually source material for the CROWNS when we recorded Royal. We put that record onto the studio engineers at the time. We want the bass to sound like this.
It's interesting. That's on that song is Mark Winchester on bass.
Okay, I know that.
But on that record, most of the slap is done by Tony Garnier, who's a bass player for Bob Dylan. And
he's a customer of ours too.
Yeah, he was. He lives in New York. He was a guest on the Slapstream
Yep, I didn't realize that was him. Wow.
And who else you mentioned? Oh, and Gaibo was a bass player for Eddie Cochran. He was the slap bass player for Eddie Cochran.
Okay.
I also featured him on the Slapstream as well.
Oh, cool. I'll have to go back and check that one out.
Oh, yeah, that was really cool. I mean, he had his wife, and then they both kind of remember things like together. It was really cool.
That's great.
Yes. Anything else that you wanted to mention as far as essential slap bass recordings? I'm not sure if I stopped you or not.
Yeah, I'll probably email you later and say, oh, I forgot this record. It sounds so good. I do remember that Brian Setzer one, though. I remember that one in particular going like, wow, that bass sounds rocking on that record. I remember like it was so clear and clean and crisp. And
yes.
I remember seeing that one a lot.
Very similar sound from Tony and Mark.
Okay,
and,
yeah.
It's excellent. Yeah, I love the way they produced it.
Yeah, it sounds really good. It sounds really clean. It's a really nice bass sound on that.
I think that's also first time Brian had gut strings on his records as far as slappers go, but I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly sure.
Yeah, I remember the first time we got to open for Brian Setzer very early on in the CROWNS days, and the bass player at the time was not a slap bass player. He had like regular metal strings. He was obviously a jazz player. But I think Brian even talked about that a bit. He had trouble finding players who could do the slap style stuff, but could also read charts. And I think so he would opt for the guys who could read charts, which made perfect sense. I would have done the same thing in his position, find the guy who could read the music. But I remember like those slap bass recordings came a little bit later for Brian. I think his first record doesn't have any of that. I'm not sure if I could.
First two records don't have slap. Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be hard, like to find slappers that read. Do you read?
I can read charts. I was actually getting okay at it for a bit, but then I kind of work that required it. I didn't have any of it, so I kind of stopped. Like I would sometimes, I remember filling in once on a pit orchestra gig once for the teacher, the bow teacher there. I think it was Guys and Dolls, so it wasn't very hard music. But I remember doing that one, and I struggled, but I made it through it, reading the charts on that. I mean, I definitely made a few mistakes, but I was able, luckily I have enough intuition. The songs are simple enough. Like, if you lose your place on the charts, like, well, just follow the other guys, So, but yeah, I can read charts a little bit, but I haven't done it in a really long time, so I'm super rusty. I would need to go back. I've done a little bit of reading, but again, I went through like the first, handful of pages on Samandal. So I got comfortable to a certain level, but again, I never proceeded. You gotta do it to a certain point, I feel, before all that starts to sink in, Otherwise, you're always starting over again, which is kind of where I'm at.
And slap gigs don't usually do not require too much reading. I'm actually doing a record now since we mentioned Brian Setzer, I'm doing a record with Bernie Dressel, who was a drummer for Brian for 15 years, but during, since the beginning until, I don't know, early 2000s, mid 2000s or something. But he was playing on all those records, and he's doing a new big band record. It's more jazz. It's way more jazz, but it has a little bit of slapping, and it's all reading, and it's. I think it's going to be a good one. It's
like a nice challenge. Little challenge of everything between reading difficult charts, playing complex music, but still being able to incorporate all the different techniques that you have, whether it be the slap style, straight up.
Yeah,
it's nice to have all those different options. Definitely.
It's more about it has kind of everything in it, and then
nice work.
And doing some odd time signatures and stuff like with reading, it could get complex, but it's really fun, and it's not like something that I do every day, so it's great to have a little challenge. As far as nowadays slappers, are there any bass players that you like? You mentioned mostly the guys that are dead now. Oh
no, I actually like there's a band there's a bass player that I like a lot. He's a friend of mine. I became friends with him actually through Facebook. I've never met him in person. His name is David Jimenez. He lives outside of Barcelona. Plays in a band called the Atomic Leopards, and he's just got a great style. The band's really great. They write their own songs. They also do a great collection of of great covers, and they're not afraid to mix up the genre. Like they recorded a version of them doing Love Cats by The Cure the other day, which I thought was really great. But he's a really great bass player. I really like him. Locally, I said there's a guy named Spike Katz who's pretty well known, I think, in rockabilly circles. Anyways, I mean, I remember seeing him when I first started playing. I remember seeing him at a festival out in Indiana. He just jumped up and played because somebody knew him. Was, hey, come on up and Spike. And Spike grabbed the bass and he was like playing his ass off and like, you know, jumping all around and doing all this other stuff too. So you could do all these great acrobatic stuff and still really lay it down and play a great line. So he's actually one of the guys I really like on a modern level as well. Trying to think here, you know, obviously like a lot of local level is like I said, Johnny Shashaw is always a great person to watch play in that style. He's obviously really good too. I don't know his name, but I should know his name. I can't draw off the top of my head, but he plays in a band called the Modern Don Juans. Tall guy. He's a really good bass player. He's been in the shop a handful of times. But I think he's the one who plays on those Modern Don Juans. What's that?
Todd?
Is that his? I think that is his name. He's a tall guy.
Yeah.
He's an awesome bass player. So he's really great.
Yeah, he's excellent. Yeah, he lives in Austin. He's from Colorado, I think.
Yes, I feel bad I couldn't remember his name. I hadn't seen him in a number of years. So, yeah, he's another bass player I really like. I get put on the spot on this. There's tons of players. I have a little trouble thinking off the top of my head right now, but there's some.
It seems that the slap bass community is kind of growing in a good way. You played with quite a few people during your career, and I wonder what the band leaders thought about slap. Like, were they encouraging you to do that, or were they like, can you don't do that like that often, or what was the deal?
Yes, that's a great question. So obviously with the CROWNS, that's not an issue because that's what's required for the music. For the most part, I mean, on some of the later, on the last record there's some stuff that's a little bit more progressive, almost like kind of like Hoyt and Heat was getting at the same time too. You know, we're making the double bass sound a little bit more like a bass guitar, and some of the rhythms just weren't working for slapping. The patterns were more like, you know, rock patterns, so like just playing it down. So that wasn't appropriate. It wasn't appropriate. But for the most part, with the CROWNS, that's what the band required. That's what it was looking for. Yeah, it definitely like playing with some other people, especially when you're just kind of like gigging. You're just showing up for the gig, and somebody hired you because they heard you could play and you're good, or you know how to play in that style of music. Definitely, you got to watch it. You got to read the room and read the players around you. I've definitely worked with some guys where like they're like, maybe don't do that as much. And I'm fine with that because it's their gig. It's not mine. You know what I mean? It's got to sound good for them. But sometimes, too, a lot of times it works naturally. Like the way they're playing, it's like, yeah, the style wouldn't work. That's why they don't want you to do it. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't work. So let's not do it tonight. I find it more with like, I was doing some bluegrass gigs for a while. And you would naturally think the slap style would work with it because there's so much in two. And there's so much on shuffle in it. There's so many shuffles and there's so many two beats. But with all that other acoustic rhythm stuff that's going on with the mandolin and the banjo and even just like the way they, you know, those two instruments together, I think I've sometimes found that the slap style stuff competed. And I found myself really gravitating away from it. And if I did, it would almost be like that swing technique we talked about a little earlier where it's more like, you know, that kind of thing. I might have done little things like that, especially if you're like really aggressive and everything was kind of like really building up or something like that. I might apply a little bit there. I didn't do it a lot. In fact, I remember doing a bluegrass gig once, and a guy who was a customer of ours, knows me pretty well, knows what I do. He's like, I'm really surprised how you played. You didn't do any of the slap stuff, you know, as I thought you would. And it's like, well, I just didn't think it doesn't feel appropriate to do it. But to answer your question, do some guys want you to not do it? I found that on occasion in the blues scene where they wanted you to not really do that because I just think maybe just wasn't seen as much in that genre of music or in their field of musicians that they work with, so they didn't see it, so they didn't like it, or maybe they thought it was rockabilly, and sometimes rockabilly gets considered more like a form of like rock and roll, or maybe even like it's sometimes associated more with like punk scenes and stuff like that. I think because a lot of us came from that background. So yeah, I've definitely worked with some guys who are like, okay, not doing that tonight, even though it's like a hard swing and I want to. It's like, nope, we're just going to lay it down. And so that's what you do. You know, you lay it down. I think it's important to have a good ability to play pizzicato, just regular, get good tone. We're just playing it. And I think, you know, obviously when you're first learning rockabilly, all you want to do is this, but sometimes you kind of forget about this. And I've been guilty of that myself, certainly. It's definitely good to have those both ready to go at any time. Because if you do want to do gigs where you're just gigging, like I'm going to get a call tonight, I'll go out and play, it's $100, or I can sit home. No, I'll go out and make $100. That's what the guy wants, just straight up hits. Well, that's what we're going to do.
I would like to talk a little bit about your gear.
Sure.
How many basses do you have? What are they? And we talked already about a setup, but like basically how many basses you have and, you know.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I like talking about gear too. So, and if we don't get asked, I find like musicians a lot of times don't get to talk about gear a lot. So I have two main basses. I have two basses. The main bass is the one I was playing earlier. That's the Upton. And then I also have an old Engelhardt from like the early 2000s. It's one of the ES9 models. So it's the blonde one with the ebony trims. It's set up in my house. It's ready to go. I don't use it out live as much, but I still use it. So those are the two main basses I have. They're both more or less set up the same. The Engelhardt on it right now has the Ava slap set, what I call the 2-in-2. So it's got the 2 nylon E&A and the 2 gut D and G. I like it because they're a little bit harder to play. So it's a good kind of, it's a little like playing that bass is a little bit like weightlifting. It's like, you know, it's a little harder to play. The sheep gut's a little heavier than the cow gut. So they're you got to dig in a little bit more. So a lot of those I use as my practice basses. Like I said, it's a little bit like weightlifting. You know, you want to get that burn in your arm going. Play that bass because that'll kind of put you into shape fast. You know, if you have to. So, but it's ready to go on any gig, and I sometimes gig with it just to take it out, just to gig with it because I don't get to use it that much. And then I have my Upton bass, the main one behind me. That's got the Rev solo pickup on it. The Engelhardt actually I think has a K&K on it right now, just because I don't know, it was in my box. It works fine. I had to put a new bridge on it recently, so I was like, well, we'll pick up on it. Throw that in there. It works. As far as amplifiers go, I've always more or less been a GK and an Ampeg guy. I mean, during the Crowns, it was Ampeg SVTs. Actually, I had 2 of them. I used to run them together. I had 2 heads and 2 cabinets. So it was kind of like, looked like, you know, Kiss or the Misfits or something behind the stage with the bass amps. Or maybe more like the Ramones, because I had those vintage ones. I had those nice early 70s SVTs. I still got them, actually. I don't have the cabinets, but I got the heads. But I don't take those out gigging much anymore because they're so heavy. But my main gigging amp is a Gallien-Kruger Fusion 550. So it's got the 2 preamp, solid state power amp. It works great. It's pretty easy to transport. It's a rack mountable head, so it's a 3-space rack. So I got it in a case, so it's easy to carry. It's well protected. Cabinets, right now I'm using the Gallien-Kruger CX series. I think that's a series that's kind of fading out. They're kind of more just conventional bass cabinets. The main one I use is a 2x10. I have a 4x10, so I can either go small, medium, or large. So I can do the 2x10, which I use for most places because most places are pretty small, so I don't need anything more than the 2x10, 2x10-inch speakers. I have a 4x10 version of it. It's the exact same cabinet. It's only 4x10. So I'll use that one if I'm playing maybe outside, if it's a slightly bigger room. And then if it's playing more like a concert stage, I'll link the 2 of them together. So I'll basically have a 6x10 combo at that point. And it's nice because at that point you're dropping your ohmage down 4. So I get to maximize the power out of the head. The only thing I really use outside of that is a Fishman preamp. I've been using them since the early 90s. In fact, I think I first heard about them because that's what Jimbo Wallace used. And I remember he had just the really basic one at the time, was a little black box with like a handful of sliders, but it really made a world of difference in terms of the sound. So I immediately went out and got one of those, and that really helped. And I've been following the Fishman product line ever since. I've always just used Fishman preamps, and I've always had really good success with those products.
Do you have any way that you fight the feedback? Do you have any special tricks?
So when I was in the Crowns, I would actually. So I made my bass look like Bill Black. So I had a brown Engelhardt at the time, an AM1 model, and so I put a white piping around it. So in order to cover the F-holes and make it look nice, what I actually did was I traced the F-hole. I made a graveyard etching of the F-hole. I ran it through a copier on sticky paper in reverse image. So the F-hole itself came out black. I would cut that out, stick it to white sticky paper. So now the edging, the margin would actually be bigger than the F-hole. I'd carefully place this. I'd pull the sticker off, carefully place this over the F-holes, and then I would very carefully use packing tape to get because when you pull the packing tape, your fingerprint leaves a mark. I'd cut that off and very carefully use 3 pieces of packing tape over each F-hole so you could cover them so it looked like it was solid. So it looked like a 60s Gretsch with a painted F-hole. That was my trick. And then the other thing I would do, but I don't do that anymore because that's a lot of work and people probably don't want to be taping up their bases. And I understand that. The biggest thing I find that helps for me is that when I do have problems with feedback, which really isn't that much anymore. I always tell people take a little cloth, a little face towel, preferably a darker color so it doesn't draw a lot of attention to itself. Roll it up and wedge it under the tailpiece. I find that it's a marginal gain, but I find it's enough. I find it actually will buy you just enough decibels before you get feedback. I find that works really well. Those are the main tricks I do. I think that the amplifiers, the preamps, and speakers and everything, they're just a little bit better than I had back initially. I mean, I used to have pretty good luck back in the 90s with those SVTs because I always thought that with a high-powered amplifier, you're not likely to be driving it hard. So I find if you drive the power amps hard and the preamps hard, you're more likely to have feedback issues. Just like if you plug in a Les Paul to a Marshall and you turn it up to 10 and take your hands away, guess what it's going to do? It's going to feedback. So for me, I always like to have more power than I needed so the amp could actually run cool and comfortable and not get not have to struggle too hard. And I found that helped me with feedback. So one way of attacking it is have more power than you need, and that's easier than ever now before. I mean, Gallien-Kruger and all the companies make mini heads that you can pick up in your hand under 1,000 watts or something like that. And you can run them at 2 ohms, so it's you really can get a lot of power without pushing the amplifier hard. And that's my biggest thing I tell people when they're fighting feedback is get more power than you need. Don't buy the 300 watt amplifier. You'll just end up buying something bigger. Make sure you got at least 400, 500 watts. I find that works a lot. But as far as the bass itself, biggest trick I always found was wedging something under the tailpiece. And you can get creative there. Like I said, you can use a simple face cloth. I used to hear people used to tell me they used to buy those little novelty footballs, the foam Nerf ones like this with the high school football team on it or something, and wedge that down there. Sure, whatever works. But those seem to be the best tricks. I find pickups that have one element on them work better than the two ones, but that's more common now. The Underwood's not quite as popular as it used to be, and the Fishman BP100 is practically non-existent. So
I'm glad you're sharing these tricks. That's interesting. As far as, is there anything that you would recommend for fellow bass players to practice on everyday bass?
I would, as we talked about earlier, I think if you can actually spend 15, 20 minutes with a bow and really practice scales, as boring as that is, and really focus on, playing in tune. The way I learned how to do it was, you take your bass, you set your chromatic tune up on a tuner in front of you on a music stand, and you just play really long, slow whole notes. Get a metronome going if you have to. It's actually preferable. You're playing that slow. Get that going and just watch that needle and do everything you can to keep that needle, dead center as best you can. I find that's a great thing. I think just spending a little bit of time playing regular pizzicato instead of the slap stuff is good because you want to sound good if you have to do that. If you're doing a rockabilly gig and then they say they want to do a slow 6/8 ballad, it's you got to have some good sustainy tone to do that. So make sure you don't forget how to get good sound just playing a straight pizzicato. And people have a lot of thoughts on technique. As you know, as a jazz player, there's all kinds of theory on best way to get good tone out of that. Just like there is with slap bass playing, how to get good, clean sounding, snaps off the fingerboard and all that stuff. A lot of technique involved there. A lot of technique with all the other things. I find that as bass players, if you can be somewhat proficient on all 3 forms, it can only help you. anything. It's like learning. Anytime you have a different perspective on something, it can only help you in the thing that you work on. Normally, like your bass, if it's flat bass or rockabilly or gypsy jazz or whatever.
Do you have any special way to warm up before the show?
Yeah, that's funny. I kind of do actually. So when I was in the Crowns, I would just start off slow and just get, because the music was fast, you know. So I would warm up and just kind of get going and going. A lot of times now, and I heard Keith Richards does this, and I don't even know if it's true, but I always heard he warmed up with the Bo Diddley beat. So that's what I do a lot of times. If I'm just getting ready to play, I'll just sit there and just warm. Want to play the Bo Diddley really fast?
Sure.
I'll just sit there and do the Bo Diddley. You know, I really will. You know, and just kind of like, my Felicia's gone. I don't have my assistant, but you can at least see my hands here. You know, but yeah, I'll just sit there. You know. I'll get a little more complex. I'm starting to feel a little more confident in my playing. So I find that works really well for me, just to warm up, to go slow, and then go build up into it. So that's how I like to do it. I always like to start off really slow. And I like that pattern because I have to kind of really relax my right arm to get that. It's a nice way to just kind of start off with something really nice and easy. And then you can make it really complex by just making it more of a habanero rhythm instead. You know, then you can throw the drag in there. And then you can start walking it around and improvising. So a lot of times I'll do that. That's one of my main things. Or just going, if I don't do that, it's probably just walking a shuffle, like a C major 12-bar shuffle, you know, or like a quick, you know, a blues pattern with a fast 4 or a quick 4. I like doing those because I can kind of like, again, I practice my scalar line, practice a little chromatic lines, mix them all up together. Kind of gets my hands going, gets me bouncing around on the different strings up and down. Whenever I start practicing, I actually do dominant scales. I do 2 octaves. So I'll go from that C up, you know, up here in half position. I'll go all the way down to that one high up on the fingerboard, and then I'll walk it all the way back. And then I'll do G, and then I'll do the full circle of fifths.
When you say dominant, you're talking about mixolydian or what?
I don't, you know, I probably made a mistake and made the wrong line, but it's the one. I'll only play half. I'll play the G because it's a little easier. And that's like make a mistake. But yeah, I'll warm up with just a regular scale like this. So I'll just do that one up, and I'll do that all the way up the neck. You know, I'll do it in C. So that's a big thing I'll do too, because that kind of gets my left hand going a little bit, and it gets really challenging to play that high C way up there because there's so little space, you know, for you to get your finger underneath the string when you're that high up the fingerboard. But I find it kind of like gets me playing at all the different little spots on my fingers here, because like sometimes I'm playing like closer to the digit, but then when I have to play, but sometimes I have to play more closer to the tip. So I find that too. Sometimes I use my third finger too. So sometimes I'll play this way, and sometimes I'll play that way. So when I'm doing all those scales, it allows me to get all 3 fingers that I'll pull the strings with working. So sometimes I'll do that too.
And I love that you're using slap in the thumb position. I always thought, you know, that's really cool.
It took a little practice to get out there, but it's kind of cool because like if somebody's doing like, you know, if you are just playing like some rockabilly or blues song and it's 12-bar and it is in something like C or B flat, common keys you're going to play in, right? Especially with B flat a little bit, maybe more with the blues, but you're in C and someone's going to like, and you go way up high like that. And it kind of like, it just adds this level of frenzy to the whole thing. I think it's kind of cool. And everybody's just up there high. It's just like this big freak out moment, and then bring it back down. Be a bass player again.
Absolutely. We have a question from Billy Bob Boy. He asked you, what are the strings on the bass that you just played?
Yeah, so that's, I normally don't do mixes, but that actually is a mix of strings. So the E and A are the Ava slaps, and then the D and the G are Lensners. The D string is really cool. It's wrapped on nylon, like those old Kaplans. And it's great because it's lasted forever. That string's been on that bass. I put that string on, I remember I switched over to a full set of clef guts because I was doing that CROWNS gig, the last one I did. And I like the softer strings because the tempos are a little quicker, and it just put me in my comfort zone. So we'll just make it easy. Just play a softer tension string than you normally would, because you'll just feel better about yourself. So I put the lower tension strings on there, and then after the gig, I kind of kept them on, but I don't really like the E and A strings are okay, but they kind of chip the fingerboard. So I was like, and I really like the bottom strings on the Ava. So I took off the E and A clef guts, and I put the Ava E and A on there, and I kept the two clef gut D, or the Lensners, I think they are, I forget what they are, on the top. The clef and the Lensners are kind of like interchangeable to me. I can't really tell the difference, so I just use whatever we got. If we got Lensners, I grab them. If we got clefs, I grab them. But that D string was wound, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, and I always really liked it. Like, some people called and complained, like, oh, I don't like the string. It's, oh, what are you talking about? That's the best one. It's the wound D. It'll last forever. And it sounds like it's a gut core wrapped on a nylon wrap. So it sounds just like gut, and it's lasted forever. Like, that G string that's on there, that's not the original one that was on the set. That broke a long time ago, but the D is still kicking. So that's what I'm playing in. Two clef gut E and A. Two Ava Parazzi slaps E and A, and then the D and the G are Lensners or clef guts, one of the two. I think they're Lensners, because I think it's the Lensner that comes with that winding. We were getting some of those for a while. It may have been the clefs, I can't remember, but it's one of the two.
Right. There you go, Billy Bob. And Contranauta mentioned, actually, I remember Jack Hanlon's Eurosonics strings video.
Yes.
And I remember that one as well. I forgot it. Thanks for reminding me. It was kind of viral in this slap world at that time.
Yeah. Oh, but I had not been working at JR Music Supply for very long, because they were the distributor of that. Okay, so somehow the owner of that company, Jacob, he had an in. I think those actually are made by Prestos. If they're not, they're probably made by guys who make Prestos. That's a theory. I don't know. I'm kind of talking out. But I don't know. I think they actually are Prestos, and all he did was he changed the color of them to, like, I think the Prestos were like a brownish color, and I think he changed them to that all white color. But yeah, then we got the Eurosonic strings had just come out, and then I remember playing them. I told Eric, guy who works here, I said, Eric, they're really tight, though. It's like, I really wouldn't be marketing these as a gut substitute. I said, gut strings are really soft. These are pretty, I'm working pretty hard to pull these suckers. You might want to reconsider that. So they're like, okay. So then they came out with mediums, or they came out with another set. And I said, well, they were like, well, try these. And I said, these are good. These are better. I like these better. They're still a little tight. I'm still working a little harder than I want to work, but yeah, they're better. So then they came out with the ultralights, and I was like, "This is, I think, about as close as you're gonna get." And the nice thing is the diameters were a little bit smaller, so they weren't like as freaky as the other one, like the medium tension ones. I said, "I think this is what we got." And I think when we got the meat without those super extra lights or whatever they call them, when they got that dialed in, when I was like, "Yeah, that's the one," I think that's when we made that video. Like, okay, can we just make a video of just playing them? We need a sound sample. And I was like, yeah, sure, because I remember I'm wearing like that. I'm wearing like that flea market Misfits shirt, like with the Crimson Ghost on it, that I bought at like a flea market. I remember I was wearing that shirt that day, and I had my Engelhardt, the one I still got, the blonde one. That's the bass, that's the same bass I have in my home right now. So yeah, that's what it was. So yeah, I was playing Eurosonics. Actually, I played those for a really, really long time. In fact, I probably still have that set that was on that bass in that recording. I think I still have them in my drawer of strings. I think I came across them recently.
That's so cool. We talked a lot about pretty much everything, but one thing that I wanted to ask you is, do you have a preferable way of recording your bass, especially slap bass?
Yeah.
Placement and all of those little things.
Yeah, so I'm definitely a fan of isolation. I like to be in the isolation booth. I like to have the bass facing the corner with whatever kind of cool, big old, fancy-looking mic they got. I like that to be in the corner. And I like that kind of sound there because it sounds really good in the room. And the other thing I like is, like, this wasn't even my idea. I think this was one of the engineers like, but I really liked it, is they had, like, some sort of, like, cymbal-y style mics. Those little, you know, the little ones that look like they're on their little rods. I think he had like one of those, like just above, like hanging around like the string area, around the fingerboard. Not really anything specific, but just in that general area. And that's what we used for the CROWNS record on Royal. And I remember it always sounded really great. And when I've done recordings since then, I've always requested, when possible, to be isolated completely with the bass. With the Soapbox Saints recordings we just did recently, we didn't have that ability, but we're pretty isolated. And we don't play super loud in our practice space anyway. So that was semi-isolated with, like, you know, plexiglass and stuff like that. But yeah, I prefer to be isolated with room mics. And then always get the sound from the pickup, but only as a backup, or maybe supply a little bit, because as a pickup can supply a little bit of clarity to notes that the microphones can't. So you can kind of, like, if the note's not producing well organically through the microphones, having the pickup as a backup, I think, is always a nice idea. Even if you just roll all the high off and just use it as a low-end supporter, I think that's good. And again, preamps are much better now than, you know, for studio recordings you can do on your own. You can probably find some nice preamps. Just use your pickup as well and get a good sound as well. So yeah, mostly mics, mostly isolation. Like to have the pickup there as a backup just in case something goes wrong in the recording.
So 2 mics, if I understood correctly.
If in an ideal situation, if I could have that one down by the bridge and then one up a little higher up near the thing. I know, like when High Noon used to play, I remember Kevin Smith had a 58. Like, just like on a Lemmy Kilmister mile style mic stand, like that, you know, like just aimed right at his bass to get the clicky stuff. And it worked quite well. And that was live. But I like the same idea of, like, I remember with being in studio, having a little bit of some sort of other mic to get the clicky stuff, the fingerboard, the stringy sound. Having a specific mic for that, I thought, gave a nice dynamic between the two. Because sometimes just having a mic down by the F-hole gets you really nice notes, but it's sometimes not. It's almost too note heavy and not enough of the clicky sound. So having something else to support that, I found, always works really well.
Absolutely, I agree with you. So the lower one, let's call it tone mic, you place it closer to the bridge or closer to the F-hole?
I think it's like usually on the treble side of the bridge, because I have that awkward technique where I straddle the bass when I play slap style. I put the bass in between my legs. I'm not playing it conventionally where it's rocked back like you're supposed to. I kind of have to anchor the bass between my legs, so I couldn't get one really on that side of me anyways because of the way I play. So it would be on the treble side, but in the vicinity of the bridge, I don't really have a super preference on where the placement is. I would let the engineer use their expertise on, like, but of where it should live generally in that area. That's kind of, I guess that's about as opinionated as I would get on it. Like, I like having some sort of microphone down in this general area between the bridge and the F-hole, somewhere in that area. If you need to come in and move it sometime to find the sweet spot, and you need to tell me where to stand to get that sweet spot, that's your job. I'm going to trust you implicitly on that this is the best way it sounds, because he knows more than I do.
Thanks a lot for sharing all of that. You know, I pretty much went through all my questions. You know, I have like one more that I always like to ask at the end. But before we get to that, like, I would like to ask you, is there anything that I missed or that you would like to mention, or something that you have, you know, to promote? You know, is there any new music coming up or anything that, you know, you want to say?
No, I mean, really, I'm just looking forward to, as far as, you know, from a music perspective, you know, outside of, like, you know, just being the specific bass stuff, looking forward to doing some playing with the Soapbox Saints. I think that's a really good band. And I think, like I said, I think Billy's a really great songwriter, and I think his songs deserve to be heard. And I'm looking forward to be playing with those guys again. So there is some music available on iTunes and all your preferred forms of listening to music digitally. It's all that's available right now. We don't, if you want a CD, you could probably get like a sweet burned copy directly from Billy's studio in his home. He could probably burn one off for you if you want one. He'll probably give it to you for free if you pay for the postage. He probably would include the postage if I know him. So yeah, so that's that project, and like he just sent me a recording, a bunch of demos of all these new songs. So I'm really excited about where that band's going to go in the future. So that's probably the biggest thing. As far as Upton basses go, you know, people look out for where we, as far as basses go. Kevin Smith has one of our travel basses. So some of our people, I know you have a lot of musicians you more or less do here are touring musicians, professionals. So they might want to check out something like that. We're kind of we have a bass that's called a suitcase bass. It completely falls apart and goes into a box. Probably not the best bass for the slap bass player, but our conventional removable neck system seems to work really quite well for the majority of bass players looking for something they can actually travel with overseas. It's probably not going to get you underweight, but getting the neck out and showing up with a big box just seems to have a better perception on the people at the airport than showing up with something that looks like a massive violin. So that seems to work for most people for traveling, and it seems to be the most, unfortunately, it's probably the most practical thing we got for traveling, and it's not as good as, it's not going to sound maybe quite as good as your regular bass with a solid set neck, but it's pretty darn close, and a lot of people use it as their main bass as well. So it's a nice alternative for traveling if you want to have that, if you want to have your own instrument on the road and fly.
That's really helpful, especially for people that rely on the back line.
Yeah, I mean, people like the caliber of Kevin Smith and stuff like that totally can take advantage of that, where they might have to fly overseas, or even like a lot of rockabilly musicians, or even if you're just like, well, we don't really do anything outside of festivals. We record, we sell, our record sales are okay, but we don't like do big tours, but we do like to go overseas and maybe do some of the big festivals. A bass like that could be handy. Well, you can actually fly with it.
Absolutely, yeah.
You don't have to borrow that one. You probably find something great at a rockabilly festival, you'd like to think, but maybe you just prefer to have your own. So it's kind of a nice option to have.
Yes, I agree. One question that I always love to finish this show is what inspired you to still do what you do, to be passionate as much as you are about music, about bass, about slap bass, about playing music, and all of that after all these years. You've been doing this like for quite a while, and I can see that you're still, excited, like talking about all of this and playing.
So what keeps me going?
Yeah,
I think what keeps me going is I think it's always about a little cliche, obviously, but like for example, the nice thing about doing a band or this band, the Soapbox Saints, or your band out there, it's kind of like the journey of kind of like working together and seeing where something's go. It's the journey of working together, creating music, and seeing where it's going to go, where it's going to take you. It's almost like, sometimes the journey is better than the objective. It's like getting together, writing songs, working on these songs, practicing these songs, putting them together, putting your input, recording them, getting it pressed, releasing it, and having people actually like it or not. I think that's a lot of it. I think it's kind of like it's almost like the process. It's kind of like, I think that's a big part of it. Is like it's the process of making music and creating it. It's fun on any level, whether it be this kind of music or any other kind of music, really. I think it's a lot of times just getting together. Personally, I like to see other bands' journeys. I like to listen to records sometimes, like in chronological order sometimes, if I got a little bit of time, just to hear the change from one to the other. Like, where did they go? What were they thinking here? What were they thinking there? And I think that's what I like about playing music too, is like, well, what are we doing now? Even just covers. Like, well, what kind of cover? What are you into these days? What are you playing? Oh, we're doing this stuff. Oh, that's cool. Let's learn a whole bunch of that stuff then. So it's that journey of process of learning all those kinds of stuff. So it's about that, and I think I just like playing live. It's fun. It's fun going out playing and having people respond positively to what you're doing most of the time. Those are not liking what you're doing. But no, I like that part of it. I think I like constructing things and having a project we're going to work on, and we're going to do this, and that's what we're going to do. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's like that kind of the journey. I know it's kind of cliche to say, but it's kind of true. I guess that's why the cliche exists.
Absolutely. Jack, thanks so much for sharing all these stories, sharing your, tips and tricks about setting up the bass and all this. I think it's very helpful. and very generous from you. Thanks. And thanks a lot for being a guest of the 50th episode of the Slapstream.
No, thank you very much. I'm really excited that you asked me to do this. I'm glad we could pull it off today.
Yes.
I'm sorry I'm dressed like a mechanic, but I am at work. But yeah, I'm really thank you very much for everything. I really this has been a blast.
And thanks to Gary for letting you do this during the workday. Yeah. And for your assistant, you had like a, the camera.
Yeah, I think she had to leave early today. I think she has a vocal gig she does. She's a singer, so I think she has a vocal gig. She usually leaves a little early on Saturday. I think she.
But it was great, like every time you go, like she would like warm up and like super professional.
All right.
Thanks a lot for everything. Good luck to you, and then I hope to see you at the Upton or somewhere down the road. At some shows. Like hopefully to see you play as well.
Yeah, if you're ever in this area, please stop in. Try to make a chance to. That's how I met Billy Horton. He just walked in one day on tour with. He was on tour with Jimmy Vaughn, and he just went in. I was like, that's like Billy Horton or something like that. I know that guy. It's like I know this dude. This is somebody important. And it was, and he bought a bass. So yeah, so come on in.
That's so cool. Thanks again. Good luck with everything, and see you somewhere down the road.
We will. We'll cross that. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
All right. The end of the 50th episode of the Slapstream with Djordje. I mean, I still have to pinch myself like this, I did this, for a 50 episode, the live stream web series about slap bass, and hope you guys are all enjoying. And it seems you do. Chris Gutierrez, great interview. Thank you. You're welcome. Cheers and good night, everyone. It was a very warm and woody stream. Thank you. Yes, it's episode 50. Congratulations. Thanks. Means a lot. Thumbs up. Carolyn, that makes two of us at work. Thank you. All right. I'm glad you're able to watch the show during your work days as well. And so good. Yes. Jack is so good. And he shared lots of really cool things about setting up the bass and playing and everything. I would like to thank all of you for being here with us tonight. I mean, I'm in Europe, so it's a night, as you can see. And thanks a lot for all the people that have been supporting the Slapstream. If you'd like to support, please check out the links in the description of this video, the PayPal and Venmo, and especially Patreon. That's something that can, really help out like on the long run. So if you enjoy these episodes, please consider clicking on that Patreon. And whatever you do, make sure to subscribe to the channel, slap that like button, and leave a comment. If you'd like me to feature someone, leave a comment under the video, not next year, like with a live chat. And congrats on the 50. Yes, thank you, Billy Bob. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to everyone. And don't forget, never fret, slide it in smooth, and keep it in a groove. I'm Djordje, and I will see you next Saturday.